everybody, this is the History Boys. Thank you so much for listening. I am Jerry Nash, your humble history boy as always, and we are in spooky season, a different sort of spooky season this year. We got a couple of different things if you've been listening along with us this year. A couple of different things. This episode's going to be a little different. It's going to be a little different, folks.
You'll see.
I'm Tyler Armentrout, first time, long time history boy.
It's the first time I've ever called in.
It's the first time I've ever been on an episode with this twist. Hit him with it, Chris.
Hey, I am Christopher Whedon, your very humble history boy today. And unlike our usual episodes where Jerry does all the talking and all the research, today it's me. So you'll have to bear with me with my fucking ADD, dyslexic, horrible memoried ass trying to tell you a story from history. It's a spooky tale, gang.
Yeah,
it doesn't get much spookier,
spooky.
frankly. I was like, what's the spookiest thing I could ever think of? And you know what it was? Chris doing research. No. Today we are talking, and very briefly, because there's so much to talk about in this story, every single subject I talk about could be its own episode, but we are talking today about hell. Yeah. So guys, hell as in, you know, the great below, the underworld, Hades, or, Hades being the guy who runs it, or sometimes the place. What do you guys think when you hear... Devil's, yes. What do you guys think when you hear about hell? What imagery or what comes to mind?
There is a, lake of fire. Mm-hmm. There are probably some jagged, black mountains in the distance.
Jaggedy
volcanoes
peaks.
Constantly erupting. The sky is black. It is a place of unimaginable horror and eternal pain and punishment. Like that song, Satan is Real.
Yes, and Satan is real, and hell is real, and I'm going to tell you all about it.
Well, real quick, my version of hell, it doesn't so much have jaggedy peaks as much as it has a character of my own imagining. His name's Jaggedy Pete. He's kind of a twisted, macabre version of St. Peter, and he makes sure that you're bad enough to get into hell.
Does he shamble?
Rock and roll!
Yeah, that's his dance move. He shambles. I don't know.
He shambles.
He does like a shambling dance move.
He's like, sorry, you're not rock and roll enough to get in.
Yeah.
And he shoots you out of a cannon into heaven.
He's played by Jack Black.
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool,
Or Meatloaf
cool guy
if he were
sunglasses.
still alive.
Maybe
Meatloaf is that now.
Ah, that's his job.
Meatloaf is at the gates of hell, seeing if you're rock and roll enough to get in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and maybe one day he'll come back to us, not unlike a bat out of hell.
Yeah, on a motorcycle, on a chrome motorcycle.
Yeah, all of that's going to be in this episode. I'm going to talk about chrome.
I worship Meatloaf now.
I'm going to talk about chrome. I'm going to talk about rock and roll.
Yeah.
Coming in on a sweet chopper made out of the Terminator T-800 model.
Yeah, exactly. It's like rock and roll.
Rock and roll. Yeah.
He shoots guns out of it.
Oh, you got to. The Second Amendment's strong in hell.
Yeah. It's like their number
only
one
amendment
thing.
there is, baby.
It's like their First Amendment.
It's their First Amendment. There's no freedom of speech, that's for sure.
Yeah. No, God, no.
It's their one amendment.
Yeah. Everyone is armed.
Yes, you have to be.
Yeah.
Them's the rules. The first accounts of a written-down land of the dead come from the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, specifically from Sumer, Sumerians.
Right. Which is this is like modern
day. Of the world.
Yeah. That's what Gozer from Ghostbusters is from.
Modern day, that's like Iraq, Iran.
Exactly, yeah. What we know from that period is written in a non-Indo-European language on clay tablets. And I actually asked my wife what a non-Indo-European language means, and I've completely forgot what she said. So you guys have to ask her.
So is it cuneiform because it's non-European, Indo-European? Would that make it cuneiform at that point?
I don't remember. The book I read literally just said non-Indo-European, and I thought it was interesting, and I don't know anything. It didn't say anything more. So I shouldn't have written it down. They wrote it down, and I wrote it down.
It's an odd way to put it.
I
would guess it's a.
I think it is a very specific meaning that if you know what it means, like my wife was like, "Oh yeah, that's actually quite interesting."
My guess, I don't know, but my guess is that it's cuneiform, like the
It might be.
cuneiform, like
Or
points.
would hieroglyphics also fall into that? Or
Perhaps.
Cuneiform is a type of hieroglyphics, sort of, but there's a
Well, yeah.
difference between one of them is actually pictures of things, and the other
and one of them
is
is like
symbols to
Yeah.
get across an idea.
yeah.
Yeah.
One's more characters.
Right.
And I'm wondering if
like
it just kind of falls
pictographical.
under that, like Babylonian, Sumerian, all that.
Yeah, I'm about to get
Pretty
into
much
that, actually.
everything in that milieu. I'm no expert. I actually, in my own research for this, I actually stumbled across it. I had Googled Fertile Crescent because I was looking for a certain kind of pornography, and then I ended up with a bunch of information on the birthplace of civilization, and
Yeah.
I learned a lot, and I didn't get anything done that I was on there to do, frankly. But
Actually, exactly what you're saying. That whole area, Fertile Crescent, Tigris-Euphrates Valley, after Sumer, which had the first written down accounts of the land of the dead, they were conquered by the Akkadians, right? Which was a Semitic tribe at the time. This whole area that included the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, a lot of this is like Persia, Iraq, that kind of stuff, and the neighboring Assyrians is commonly known as Mesopotamia, right?
Right. So this is like
So
Asia
this is
Minor.
the area in which we're talking about, Mesopotamia, Middle East kind of area, right?
Modern day Turkey is probably where the
Yeah,
Akkadians
like that
are
kind.
also
Yeah,
from.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
Asia
these people all had like similar beliefs, right, about religion and like because they conquered each other, they traded. So a lot of there's various differences in their religions, but they're kind of the first real understanding of things that are written down and that include a land of the dead, which is why we're talking about them. A lot of them have a lot of their underworld stories had things that involve various ideas that are going to sound really familiar to you if you know much about the geography of what hell would look like in modern times, what we view it looking like. Things like a mountain barrier, which feels to me very like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
A river, a boatman, gates and guardians, sometimes multiple gates and guardians, and like an important tree, right? These are really common things that existed in this time period.
So it's like an old man's directions. It's
exactly.
It's like you're gonna,
Maybe that's where it
you're gonna
came
see a
from.
boatman, and then you're gonna see an important tree.
People were like, yeah, we took this guy took the directions. He said, you got to follow the mountain and then pass the river. You got to pay the boatman, and he died. So that's
you gotta
how
pay the you gotta pay the fee.
you got to pay the troll toll. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
These groups believed in sky gods that lived in a great above. I put that in air quotes. And in the underworld. When
they were talking about, I know this is not really talking about like the underworld, but like, and this is probably, not true for everyone, but like when they say sky gods, like a great beyond or whatever, like in the sky, I know that like, the Greeks were like on top of Mount Olympus.
Yeah.
Is it like that? Like, are they on top of big mountains, or like, are they
in this
just
case, I
floating
think
on
that
clouds? Or
I think they viewed things like I think people they didn't view the world in as physical an aspect as we do as today. Okay. And I think that like what you see with like the Greeks, my guess would be like they understood sort of the geography of the world a little better at this time. Mm-hmm. So I think that like they just either it was like literally they lived on clouds and shit, or it was almost kind of a otherworldly
more of an abstraction.
Thing. Yeah. I'm of the opinion that I think that.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of this, the people who write this actually viewed these stories as metaphorical. I don't think that they were ever written literally, and I actually think that we were talking about, what's the guy's name? The Greek historian, Jerry.
Herodotus.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he almost invented writing things literally in a weird way. Right. Where it's like, I think these things are all just intended to be metaphor, and I think the idea of people taking things literally was almost like not understood at this time.
That's interesting, yeah, because like, I mean, even living back then, believing that like do people really believe that like Hercules existed? You know what I mean?
That's the other thing that I think is interesting is like you have one guy like you read Ovid, you read Hesiod, you need Horace, Homer, there are variations in all these stories, and I think that there was a certain level of like, put your own spin on it kind of thing. You know what I mean?
More of a legend kind
and
of.
And they kind of understood that, and I think that's kind of where I come from when I say that they understood that these were tales. I think they did believe I think they did believe that Zeus was real, but they were honoring him by telling stories about him.
Yeah,
right. They're like,
I mean, I think a lot of the pop culture stuff that we have now, people refer to as modern mythology, and they do so for a reason. They're stories that are meant to be allegories. They're meant to inspire people. They're meant to have a moral for younger people. And I mean, you know,
like the shit that like your aunt posts on Facebook. That's like, this man got out of his car and helped this other man, and that man turned out to be Richard Nixon. You know, shit like that. You know,
I mean,
copy and paste this.
I do think. Well, there's
like
definitely a level of the
chain
phone game, of course.
Yeah.
If especially if things are not written down, and then
Yeah.
I think on top of that, it's like, I think they jazz it up so people actually fucking listen. You know,
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
go, don't go over and do that thing. They're like,
do it.
fuck you. But if they're like, well, Zeus will fucking fry your ass, then it's like, okay. Or at least spice up the story so people actually fucking listen to it, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of that. And, you know, it's kind of hard for us to think with our modern minds about the way they viewed things because, you know, physics
So long
doesn't
ago.
exist yet, as far as they
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I'd like
you
to
know?
think it's more of a death rattle game. People saying what's their last words as they die, and people are like he's like, like, don't forget to. And he's like, what was he trying to say?
The council of...
Yeah, he's like, maybe it sounded like mountain. Maybe
he
there's
was
a
dictating.
mountain where he is.
Yeah.
Maybe there's
gotta go to
mountains
the
in hell. He was a
Oracle.
piece of shit, so he had to have not gone to a good place.
Oh, there's mountains in hell. At least some criggity
You gotta
crags,
go to
you
an
know?
oracle and get that shit figured out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
some
exactly.
some 19-year-old that's been on heavy hallucinogenics, you know, without
Yeah.
her knowledge.
So...
Or maybe with her knowledge. I don't know.
In
Anyway.
addition to, you know, your great above, as we were just talking about, they believed also in an underworld or like the great below. And that's pretty much where people went with when they died. And most at this time, like, and honestly, and we
everybody
will
went
get to it, it's like the idea of like hell just, or not hell, sorry, the underworld being, that's just where the souls went. And they didn't
That's where
really,
everybody went.
it's just,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes they would tell stories about going down there, and there would be, like, Gilgamesh, for example, includes a story about him going down into the underworld and saving somebody. And this idea about, like, going into the underworld and bringing somebody back would become later, like, a term called the harrowing of hell, which exists well into, like, Christianity. And you'll see that later. Like, there's stories about Jesus doing that, going down into hell after he's crucified. But I will get back to that later. And you see that stuff in, like, Gilgamesh, and you see that stuff in, like, all sorts of stories at the time.
Like every
Yeah.
story, it seems like that's like a trope. You know what I mean? Like yeah, somebody has to go into the deepest, darkest place to pull out like whatever it is, the light or a sword or whatever the fuck. You know?
Yeah. And I'm not going to get into the story of Gilgamesh. It's a great story, you know. It's mostly complete. We don't have all the pieces of it, and there's various versions. But a lot of times, it's mostly him going down to save his like buddy or lover, possibly, in Keto. And it usually includes a river, and some versions of it, a tree that is cursed by the demon Lilith, right? Who would end up being part of Jewish religion. If you do remember me saying that a lot of Semitic tribes were part of this, like the Akkadians, for example. Where you also see like some of the best examples, early examples of the land of the dead, the underworld, is in ancient Egypt, right? You got thousands of years and like so much story behind that it remained consistent because they were so, you know, conservative in their way of thinking that they just passed everything down. There was a very specific.
It was kind of their number one thing.
Yeah, exactly. And we've talked about that in other episodes.
They didn't even want to die anywhere else because they were afraid. You know,
they
of not
believe,
being
exactly. They
mummified
believe
and
that
being preserved.
the sun god Ra, for example, went at night. And I, you know, when I say believed,
Oh man. Well, like the whole like rivers, like I think they really believe that because like they wrote down all of the instructions. That was privileged information. Like not everybody got all of that.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to get into that. Like Ra, they believe traveled through traveled through a boat in the underworld every night, and that's where the sun went at night.
Oh yeah.
And they believed that like the demon or the god of chaos, Apep, would fight and defeat him one day down in the underworld. and that would mean the end of the world. There would be no sun anymore, right? So you already have like apocalyptic ideas happening this early, you know,
which is still a face-off between good and evil. Like,
well, exactly, and that, I mean, you have that in Osiris versus Set or Seth, where he, you know, rips Osiris apart and he becomes sort of the god of the dead, the god of the underworld. Not to be confused with Anubis, who was more of a guide. You know, the jackal-headed Anubis.
He was more of like a guy.
He's more of a guy, like a cool guy. He was the guy who he would lead you down, and he would be like, he'd bring you to the house of judgment, and you'd weigh.
That doesn't sound very fun.
No, nope. You'd weigh your heart on a scales, right? You've probably heard this story. You weigh your heart on scales.
Yeah.
Against a feather of the goddess Mat, and whatever was, if you were, you know, piece of shit, if you're sinful, your heart would weigh more than the feather, and that would mean that you're dead. You're gone. Yeah. And that's kind of how they viewed that. Like they throw the heart to the demon, you know, monster Emmet, not Emmet, Amit.
Emmet.
Who was a really cool visual, which I'm a little upset that they didn't nail that in Moon Knight that well. It looks more just like a crocodile goddess, but in this, it's like she's got hippo and lion and crocodile mixed in and eats the heart, and then you're done. You're done. You're gone.
And skip the middleman. Just feed my heart directly to the beast. Like
the thing I was reading, the book I was reading was even talking about like, when you're getting your heart weighed, you can kind of like say whatever you want. Like you'd be like, Anubis, you know, like I did my best here, and you know, I'm sorry I stole that thing and whatever, but like none of that fucking matters.
Or,
He's like, say whatever you fucking. I don't give a shit. Go ahead, say it. Say your piece. This is the last chance you get.
Like, fuck you.
He doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
It's all how much your heart weighs. He'll fucking pitch it to his little puppy dog, and that thing will eat it. So if you do go to the underworld, sorry, well, go ahead.
I was just gonna say. So what you're saying is it's like the opposite of like Christian religions, where they're like, oh, you can like repent all your sins on your deathbed and get forgiven for everything, and you're still gonna go to heaven as long as you do it.
That's specifically Catholicism.
Yeah, and that's actually, interestingly enough, that's specific to...
no, they're not.
It's one of those things
don't know.
I'm actually going to get into like how purgatory was kind of brought about later, and it's kind of a similar concept. But
that's a Catholic.
If your whole soul doesn't get eaten, you have to journey. Then it's not easy now. You still have to journey through the land of the dead.
Oh, for God's sake.
Some bullshit you got to deal with: snakes, crocodiles.
Dude, it's a whole thing. Jesus,
it's a whole fucking thing. And
sounds like
Jerry was actually saying, if you have there was privileged information, like the Book of the Dead, and it was like a list of spells and things you could do, so you could this will help you get. It's like a cheat code, I guess.
Yeah,
I like to think of
secret handshakes. It tells you all the secret handshakes and passwords beforehand.
You know when you were a kid, and you had the player's guide. Before the internet.
It's a primo player's guide to the.
Yeah, you're like, okay, so here's where you gotta if you gotta jump over the alligator here and all that shit. That's what the Book of the Dead was. It was a series of
Beetlejuice kind of has that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then eventually you get to there's all kinds of crazy shit, like an egg that'll fuck you up and all this shit. But a lot of weird imagery. But you could see already, if you know much about the modern view of hell, the idea of being judged in the afterlife and.
But this one sounds like a giant pain in the ass.
Oh yeah, fuck it all.
I mean,
just eat the heart.
What I do like is that, and burning and stuff. It's more like, Jesus Christ, I'm waiting. I gotta wait in line.
The other thing is, and you see this a lot in older religions, it's the idea of not existing anymore. And I have to believe, I think a lot of even early Christians kind of looked at it. You either went to heaven or you just ceased to exist, right?
Right.
And hell, became a thing for reasons we'll get into more. But you can already see, the idea of getting judged in the afterlife, which will exist all the way down. You can see these sort of bones, these structures in place.
Yeah. Oh, there's bones down there.
So, another religion that is vastly important to to the sort of dualistic view of modern Christianity, hell and heaven, is Zoroastrianism. Now, Zoroastrianism was a dualistic religion. So they, the last thing I was saying with, the Mesopotamian religions, they had great above and a great below. But this actually had the idea of, there was a good, a good leader, like a god, right? In heaven. Whose name was, forgive me real quick, Ahura Mazda.
Okay.
which also means wise lord, or they called him Ormazd,
Yeah.
I believe is how you pronounce that.
2014 Hormazda.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's over
Like new
100,000
condition,
miles.
15,000 miles somehow.
It's better than the Toyota Tercel.
Yeah.
They don't make that anymore, do they? And he, you know, up in heaven, their heaven, as they called it, like
Yeah.
they didn't necessarily. He had 7 angels that he lived with called Anisha Spenta, or angels, right? I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, but I do not care. Unlike Jerry, if you listeners at home, if you want to tell me how to pronounce this, I delete that email. I don't want to read it. I'm kidding. I'm doing my best, man.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great.
I will say, in Crusader Kings, it is damn near impossible to play as a Zoroastrian leader.
Well, yeah, they were completely wiped out, and they actually existed. They think that the prophet Zoroaster, who this all kind of came from, was just
I thought it was Zorro.
lived with Bronze Age nomads about 1,000 years BCE, right?
Yeah.
Their sacred book, the Avesta, wasn't written until about the 5th century CE. So that's almost like 1,600 years of just people talking about it until they actually wrote it down.
Fucking winging it.
We don't really know a lot about what they believed at the time. Yeah, totally, exactly.
Yeah.
And then they only lasted about 200 years later when they were snuffed out
Like,
by
I don't
Islam.
know, there's some bats or something. I don't know.
And the Muslims, yeah, exactly, some bats, whatever. The Muslims really did a lot of work to destroy their culture, right? After they invaded them, you know. So they actually existed quite later than people realize. Like, you hear about Zoroastrianism and you think like, oh, that's really old. That's like pre-Mesopotamia, but it actually isn't. They just got totally fucked over and burned to the ground.
5th century AD?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Now,
That's when the book was
surprising.
written. And they
Now,
lasted till the 7th
were
7th
they-
century.
Did Zoroastrians, did they like make like icons? Like, did they make figures of their gods or paint pictures of their gods or anything like that? Because like
actually
that
don't
could
know.
it could be a contributing factor to why like the Muslims had such fervor.
Well, I mean, they did have a
against it.
sacred book, but like I was saying, they didn't have. It was, you know, 1,600 years.
Yeah. Well, it's
Later
it's
is
like
when.
well,
it
yeah, it's
got
like
written.
everybody else had their book, and they were like, ah, shit.
So
we
either
should've
like
had a
I wonder
book.
if that was all destroyed. I don't know. Like
It's like, let's write a book. Hurry up and write a book, guys.
I could
Like,
do. We could
should've
do an
wrote a
entire
book.
episode on Zoroastrianism. You know.
Yeah,
And-
totally.
But we
Sorry.
really don't know a lot about it, just because of it, it's that whole thing. It's like our religion won, and we destroy yours. You know, and you're going to see that time and time again, where it's like, you know, all the like Christian demons are gods from this time period. You know.
Yep.
Yeah. They're like,
Zoroastrianism
afraid
was
of it.
actually, it's based on an older faith that also went into being part of what Hinduism and Buddhism. So on one side you have Zoroastrianism, and then more of the East, Hinduism, Buddhism sprouted out of the same sort of way of thinking, which is before Zoroastrianism. So that's actually about the only time I'm going to get into Eastern religions in this, because we just don't have time, so I'm focusing on Western.
Right.
But yeah, Zoroastrianism, before them, there's that sort of faith ended up becoming part of what is also Hinduism and Buddhism. They have like a, what would you say, like a, what do you call that in evolution, where it's,
Like
yes.
a vestigial limb?
no, they're like a shared
Common ancestor.
Common ancestor, thank you.
ancestor.
They had like a common ancestor, which I thought was pretty interesting.
yeah.
So in Zoroastrianism, there's also the evil spirit or god that lives in the underworld. Angra Mainyu, I don't know if I'm saying that right, or Ahriman,
Sounds-
which I think is an anime. I think Ahriman means evil spirit. He could also be called the Lord of Lies.
Ah, badass.
Does that sound
Well,
familiar? By the
Yeah,
way,
it does.
Sounds like lies are on the menu.
well, they say that a lot of these ideas, like, even though it's not really stated, had to have influenced early Christians, right? And you can
Yeah.
absolutely see what I'm talking
Well,
about.
something that like is interesting to me too is that like they view all of these things as like monsters. You know, like later Christians view like the older gods as monsters because like they made big statues of them and stuff. And like those statues terrify me in the year 2022. You
Right.
know, and it's like I gotta think they saw those and they were like demons.
Oh,
Demons
yeah.
from hell, because like I mean, come on, dude, you're
probably
walking
kind of
around,
afraid
you
of 'em.
see it in a field. Nobody told you what that's about. Like there's no book going around. You didn't read the book anyway. You know, telling you what all this shit is. So like, I gotta think people are just like, I don't know what that is. We all forgot what that was. It's sitting out there, it looks evil. You know.
Yeah.
I gotta
So-
think there's something to that.
Oh,
I
I
hope
was just-
someday once the Statue of Liberty, like when our country's gone and like future people go by the Statue of Liberty, they're like, "What's that?" They're like, "I don't know, monster."
that's what
No,
the
they're
apes
gonna-
thought.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're gonna
Mount
go by
Rushmore.
and be like, "You goddamn apes!" That's what they're gonna say.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Mount Rushmore. They're like, "What about that? 4 monsters, Rio
Yeah.
de Janeiro." I don't know.
Except for Mount
Mom-
Rushmore, that one's sort of the truth.
Yeah, that would go fuck
That's
itself.
no lies detected. I don't know.
more like Mount
takes.
Crushmore in terms of the dreams of the people that they,
Crushed. Yeah.
Crushed. Yeah.
got them.
Yeah.
I fucking got them.
You got roasted,
And-
Tyler.
And before we move on, I just want to say, did I miss my opportunity to refer to something as a whole mess Opotamia?
Oh yeah, I'm kind of moving out of it. I'm moving out of it right now.
Yeah.
Well, can you
Yeah.
take me saying that and then put it earlier in the
Yeah,
episode?
I'll edit it in. Yes, exactly. So
It'll be like, "Hey,
Zoroastrianism.
welcome to the History Boys," and then it's just Mesopotamia, and then it goes back into the episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, don't never be sorry. Never. So in Zoroastrianism, they had, they believed the soul went to the underworld and was judged, And what I thought was interesting is they very specifically, counted your good deeds minus your bad deeds, right? And they would call good deeds credits and bad deeds debts, and it feels very much like the Good Place, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
it
very
seems like a video
specific.
game.
They had a great
Yeah.
ledger where they wrote it all in,
Yeah. That's one hell of a job.
And
After
pretty
you
much
die.
if it was in the negative, even by just a little bit, you went to hell or their version of hell,
Yeah.
And if
So
you
like,
were
so
if you
when
were
you
good,
die,
you
gotta
went
like
to
work.
What?
You gotta when you die, you gotta go work the ledger. That sucks.
well, I
like you
think-
gotta
no,
go
the-
be on a big ledger, be like, God, gotta
the
climb the
judges
ladder
work
all the way
the
up there.
judges
again.
work the ledger. There's specifically
No.
the judges
Their
named
job-
Rashnu and Mithra.
No, their job
I didn't-
sucks.
Yeah, fuck that. That's you keep seeing. This is another thing. Like the judges of the dead are often that's like their job, right? Sometimes in these, they're like somebody who's died, like some ancient king. You see that in Greek mythology and shit like
Saint
that.
Peter. Right?
Yeah. And they're like the dude who does
Jaggedy
that.
Pete.
Jaggedy Pete, exactly. Meatloaf.
Yeah, exactly.
Evil souls go to, their version of hell, and good souls go to a place called the House of Song, which feels also very Lord of the Rings to me.
Sounds
They also-
sounds like the Hard Rock Cafe.
They had an even-
House of Blues. BB King. I think I mixed like 3 places together, but whatever. You guys get the idea.
Yeah, you can
fucking
get,
Roadhouse.
bottomless chicken wings there on Tuesday nights.
Absolutely.
Where they're like the House of Song, and the word "song" is like it's like a brand, and it sizzles into the logo.
fancy.
House of Song, Bar and Grill.
Yeah,
Yeah.
get some mesquite wings on a Friday night.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So they also believed in an apocalyptic fight between good and evil at the end of the, where we'll destroy the world and good and evil will finally fight,
Yeah.
Which of course, sounds
Yeah.
totally familiar.
Solid third act.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Actually,
absolutely.
that's funny because it's like a lot of the art. I'm going to get into that, but specifically the art of Hieronymus Bosch. There'd be like a 3-section thing, and it'd be like actually acts, and one of them
Is that
being
a triptych?
the. Yes. Yes. That is, yeah, exactly. Sometimes there were
Yeah.
little cabinets that you'd open.
You'd open up, you see.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this brings us to the Greeks, right? And everybody knows about Greek mythology, so I'm just gonna rush through this shit because you know what? Watch Disney's Hercules. It's pretty
It
accurate.
tells you everything. Yeah.
Actually, this is perfect timing because God of War Ragnarok. No, wait, that's
Actually,
Norse
yeah.
mythology. The
Oh,
old
yeah.
ones were Greek mythology. You can pick
I
them
love
up.
those games.
Pick up the old ones, and
I actually
learn them.
love Disney's Hercules, even though it's not totally accurate. I don't give a fuck if things are
Yeah.
accurate.
Well, the mythology itself is not accurate. It's made up story. So.
What's the real stories of Hercules? Like him,
He's
being
like-
driven to madness by Hera and murdering and
He threw a
His
football
family.
like a mile.
he could throw. I could throw a football over those mountains.
Yeah.
That's Hercules or
Yeah.
Heracles, as they called him in Greek.
Whatever was really impressive at that time, like cleaning out stables, really good. And they're like,
Oh yeah,
wow.
one of the the 12 labors.
Yeah.
Yeah, they was just filled with shit, and he had to move the river to.
Yeah, and it's like that's
to
not
wash it out.
super like impressive to us now, but back then they were like, holy
I just
shit.
like that. Is he digging a new thing? Because I always imagine, like digging new trenches for the river. Because what I always imagined was he literally just grabbed the river like a fucking cartoon character.
Oh, yeah,
like
yeah.
the side of it and pulled the river.
Bugs Bunny. Pulls it out. Yeah.
That's what I think. That's how I think they viewed it.
Yeah.
So tons of imagery in Greek mythology you'll actually see just repeated over and over and over because like Greek and Roman mythology just kept it. First of all, never really got all of it destroyed, plus
Right.
people really liked it, and it comes back constantly, so there's so much imagery and ideas that happen in Greek mythology that also, Roman mythology, which is pretty much the same fucking thing, that you're going to see later in some of these
Cultural appropriation.
and in some versions of
Cultural
Christian
appreciation.
stories, you actually have like in hell, like Hades even exists. Like he's a separate
Right.
entity from Satan, where it's like
Right.
he's like just the dude who runs the land of the dead.
So Satan is like his lackey, then?
Satan is Hades' lackey.
Yeah.
Yes,
Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah,
There is
in one circumstance, yes,
Wow.
and in Paradise Lost, it kind of goes the other way, but I'll get into that when we talk about Paradise Lost.
Okay.
But Hades, Persephone, the queen of the underworld, then the rivers that you saw, the rivers of the underworld, the Styx, the Lethe, the Acheron, the Plagiathon, and what is it? Yeah, Cocytus is my favorite.
yes. Yeah.
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 And Styx, obviously really good band. They're
Yeah,
very silly.
I was talking to Chris about this episode, and I remember that part where like Homer is like playing Odysseus, and like they're like you have to go down to the river Styx, and he gets down there. Of course it's a river with fire and like there's skeletons, but they're all like headbanging, and it's like a Styx song playing, and he's like, oh, this really is hell.
Yeah, the boatman obviously returns again. The river,
Yep.
that existed in other things, and those will continue. Paying the boatman, or the
Yeah.
boatman's call,
Ah.
being a call to death essentially.
Yeah.
A lot of characters that have traveled down into the underworld. Orpheus, Hercules, Theseus, Odysseus. They keep coming back up. Avian and Christian ideas. You had Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog. You'll see him coming up in
good boy.
Christian stories.
Yeah, it's a sweet boy. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Plato actually had some thoughts on the underworld as well. I mean, we all know Plato, and I'm not going to get into all his mythologies, but the
Yeah,
whole
it's something I used to play with
philosophies.
as a child.
Yeah, so
Plato.
actually, my son really likes Plato. It's his favorite philosopher and also his favorite.
He's way in the
thing to
idea.
mash into the carpet.
Yeah, well, that's because to truly live a fulfilled life, as Plato said, you must mash, sort of a clay that you can make things out of,
Substance.
like little doggies and stuff. Mash that into the carpet. That's
Still,
what Plato.
It still smells
Of Athens.
nostalgic.
Yeah.
I to this
Oh, dude.
day. I grabbed a hunk and I was like, I wonder, and I smelled it, and I almost want to just be like, just
yeah.
fucking.
When I was
lick
over
it.
at your place
You didn't
last,
get
and
over it.
our friend's daughter came over and like gave us, he's like, here's a piece of cake, and it was like made out of Play-Doh. I smelled it and I was like, oh, I want to eat this. It smells like Play-Doh. Like I used to eat so much fucking Play-Doh as a kid.
Don't tempt
like,
me,
oh, I
dude.
will
Like
eat this. This
I had to
does
get
smell
over
good.
that as a kid.
Yeah.
Like,
This
I had
is
to
better than
restrain
that
myself.
plastic ice cream bullshit you were serving up earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so he, particularly in his work Phaedo, he has Socrates talking about, Socrates famously had to drink hemlock because he was corrupting the youth,
Yeah.
Rock and roll.
Yeah, he's
rock and roll
telling
as
him to
fuck.
live
And
an
he's like, fuck yeah,
example
I'm gonna do that. And in Phaedo, he has sort of a whole monologue about what is going to happen after, you go to the underworld. And it's very, like, weird. And I find it funny how weird and specific it is. Because he talks... I wrote down the whole quote, but I'm not going to read the whole fucking thing. But it's, like, basically, it's like... He's talking about, like, super evil people. They're going right to Tartarus. No stop.
They're done.
there forever. It's like talking about also the idea of an immortal soul, right? The soul not dying is something that they talk about in this.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of like if you're straight up murder or you just truly unrepentant evil, they're going right to Tartarus. Tartarus being, I don't think I actually mentioned this, the hell and their darkest, deepest part of Greek mythology's underworld. That's where the really bad people went.
Yeah.
And in most of the stories, I actually find is like I don't really think people believed that your average Joe goes there. It's like people who
The murderers. Yeah, and
well, even
shitheads
worse,
go there.
like people like who truly defied the gods, like Sisyphus and Tantalus and shit. You know, Tantalus fed the gods his own children in a meal, and Sisyphus tricked the Grim Reaper, or sorry, Thanatos, not Grim Reaper at the time, but tricked Death into wearing handcuffs, and like Death was like, "Oh fuck, nobody's gonna die now." So he has to push a rock up
Like
the hill.
like
for
when
eternity.
Bill and Ted when they beat the Grim Reaper.
Yeah.
Well, I
did that.
suppose, yeah, all that is worse than like child molesters. Then,
Well, I think child
what I'm
molesting was
saying?
not a sin to these people. I'm gonna be
yeah,
real with
yeah,
you. Like,
yeah, probably, yeah, totally.
have you ever heard about what they did in Sparta? Come on.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
It was
was part
I'm
of their
sure it was
thing.
frowned upon to a degree. No, it wasn't even frowned upon. It was
Yeah.
like it's what you do. Everyone's
Yeah, I don't. Unfortunately,
doing
it.
this
You
is
go-
one of the
you-
ways society has evolved in a
You go to
positive way.
Tartarus if you don't molest any kids.
Yeah, probably.
What are you trying to? What do you think you're better than us?
So I also think it's interesting. Socrates goes on to talk about like some of your also your murderers. I guess your murderers. He's kind of saying that like real people can go to Tartarus. Like your murderers do go to Tartarus, but those are the ones who are like unrepentant evil murderers. And then he talks about like people who almost like commit murder as a crime of passion or almost like forgivable. Like you shouldn't have done that, but like it in an almost sort of like purgatory kind of way. Like you'd go to Tartarus for a little bit.
But you're real sorry.
And then you'd have to, exactly. You'd have to talk to the spirit that you wronged.
Yeah,
And after what was it, like 100 years or a year, like a year,
yeah.
which doesn't seem that long. Like a year, you'd be like, "Hey, person I wronged, do you forgive me?" And if they forgive you, you can get out of Tartarus.
Okay.
I didn't really view.
I do got to think at this point though, there's somebody in the crowd going like, "All right, Socrates is stalling for time.
Yeah,
Just drink
this-
up, buddy."
The funny thing I think about this is it's like he's just saying all the he's just going on and on and on about this shit, and he's like, so anyway, it does seem that way. I also think it's funny how like definitive it is. Where it's almost like he's talking about the underworld the same way that like Plato talks about like how government should be ran in the Republic. You know what I mean? He's
Right.
like, well, this is how it should be, so this is how it is. But it's really
He's like,
strange.
this is
how,
what
like-
I'm into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now the Romans, and as you know, had very similar religion. They kind of changed the names of the people. The Romans kind of they just absorbed a lot of religion, a lot of other ideas, and like they were kind of like very more so than really any culture at this point in time. Were very cross cultural. Of course, they had their sort of like this is the Roman belief, but like they, as similar to the Greeks, believed like everything in nature and even like households and like had its own god or spirit, and they were able to be like, okay, they go to Egypt and it's like you got your gods, and you're like, oh, maybe this god, your god here is Hermes or Mercury or whatever, and they were able to kind of like reconcile that idea. So like it was kind of easy to just worship what you want as long as you're like giving Rome its due.
Yeah, basically, because like there's always this other group of people that's always a giant pain in the ass for the Romans, the Jews.
Yeah,
and
I'm getting that.
Yeah, and like Caligula, he was like, yeah, you made sacrifices to like Rome, but not me. You know what I mean? And like that was the problem.
He famously wanted to build that. Wasn't it a statue in their temple or
statue in their
of
temple.
himself?
Yeah.
And luckily they were like, dude, they're already mad enough.
Yeah.
The Rome did a lot to piss off your Jewish and Christian people throughout the years, and I'm sure vice versa.
But like they would deify their emperors too,
Oh
like
yeah,
when they
yeah,
died,
and that's actually where early Christianity and Jewish ideas really bumped heads. Like it was the monotheistic ideas that almost couldn't fly in Rome, and that's kind of why they butted heads so much and why they were more subjugated. And like at least in like Rome, if like you worship some other random god, you could still be like, give Rome its due, yes, Jupiter, all that, but I'm really about my guy. You know what I mean? You can kind of get away with that to a degree.
The Romans are like, you're trying to tell me that the god that turns off the sky at night is also the god who runs my toilet?
Bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That can't be
Also
true.
human shit that goes to the toilet god.
Yeah. Where he eats
Yeah.
it up.
Yeah. He eats it up, and that's the tribute I pay to him. He's disgusting, and it's also kind of hot sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I'm into that kind of thing.
So these ways of thinking is really, really butted heads, and it was sort of like it can be one or the other, and it kind of ended, you know what I mean? Like, it ended up being one and not the other. But
Right.
so Virgil in the Aeneid, which was written at some point between 30 BCE and 19 BCE, which is like a 21-year gap.
Yeah.
If I did my math right. No, it's an 11-year gap. My bad.
Yeah.
And it actually has very...
30 BCE. Wait.
Yeah,
And
11-year gap. I misspoke.
wait.
Sometimes when they write that, where it's like, it was written between these 2 points, I'm like, so either that means we're like somewhere
Isn't 30
in
to
that.
19 49 years?
No.
Because
No.
doesn't it go backwards to
Yeah,
30, back to 0, and then up to 19, you said?
No, it's all BC.
Oh, I thought you went... I
I
thought
get
you went
what you
over
mean.
this... Over
No,
the
we
baby
didn't-
Jesus line.
No, he didn't. He didn't cross baby Jesus. But the Aeneid,
Nobody does. And gets
which
away
is
with it.
the Aeneid's interesting because it's actually the story of Aeneas, who was a Trojan, who in the Trojan War escapes the siege and fall of Troy, and it actually is the first really strong description of the Trojan horse, which doesn't actually exist in the Iliad, and it's briefly mentioned in the Odyssey. But that just briefly, where like Odysseus is like, yeah, I did this shit. But really, the bulk of our understanding of it comes from from a Roman poet, Virgil. But he, in his story, has a very strong description of the underworld as well. And he even has kind of one of the first ideas of a place called Limbo, where it's like,
It's always a party.
yeah, well, yeah, you kind of go.
How low can you go?
I think it's almost like before the river Styx. Like these people just kind of exist in between, and that kind of idea became really important to Christians, where it was sort of, and I will get into this, but the idea that in limbo, that's where like if you didn't know about Christ but you were like some of the heroes in the Old Testament went to limbo, because they didn't know about
Sucks
Christ.
for
They
them.
they didn't have Christ's love to bring them to heaven, right?
It's for babies
Yeah,
and
and that-
Northern Africans.
Yeah. Well, they actually
and all of the Native Americans that weren't Mormon.
Christians, well, in certain it became in the canon that there were 2 limbos, or 3, I think, even, and one of them was for like unbaptized babies, specifically.
That's
So-
that's dark.
They're like,
necessary
wait, hold on. I just got here. What's going on? And they're like,
We were just
So
You
moving
got
on.
me.
So the Gnostics in Gnosticism. Have you guys heard about Gnosticism?
Oh yes.
It's pretty interesting because it's sort of it's a group of religious ideas amongst Christians and Jews during the 1st century CE or AD. And Gnostic myth almost it views like God as like there's this high one, or even like alien God, like exists just out there, maybe created the universe, but didn't create Earth, didn't create matter. And there's this sort of angel that admired the high one and tried to create sort of that asexual creation. I don't know what the fuck he created, because it, seems like this next guy did everything. But like she tries to create this being, and he becomes this like shapeless abomination called the demiurge, or lower god. And the demiurge is the one who created Earth and created matter and created mankind.
Oh,
And he doesn't
This is
even
what I want
know.
to believe in.
So it's like their basic idea is almost like Yahweh, the
Yeah.
Jewish name
I say
for
no
God.
way.
Yeah. They're almost saying that, like, no, that's actually the devil,
Okay.
right?
So
And
I do
above
like this
him
idea.
is God.
I do like this idea of like somebody like fucking up and being like, oh no, get rid of this one, and like this shambling abomination is like, and
then he
like
goes up and he
creates
creates-
the earth.
Yeah. They're like, oh, what did that thing do over there?
Oh,
They like
God
don't even
damn
know
it.
it's over there.
There's shit
Yeah.
living on that.
Well, the interesting so basically they viewed like all matter, everything was evil. Like humans were evil, matter was evil,
Yeah.
everything was just we are all flawed because we are separated from the high God, the high one.
Yeah.
He doesn't even know we exist or doesn't give a shit.
Ah.
And like this idea is unpopular with a lot of Christians.
Well, yeah, it's
due
kind
to
of
the
a
fact
downer.
that it's kind of saying that There's a number of things like here where, I mean, Christianity goes back and forth on the idea about whether Earth is good, but it generally, like, nature is generally considered good. It's created by God. But saying it's not good, that it's evil, is kind of, and mankind too, it's kind of just saying that the devil created all this, and all of it's evil, and that is often an unpopular and heretical opinion, as far as a lot of Christians would be.
They took it back to their marketing team, and they were like, "We got to rework this, guys.
This is
we got to switch some of this stuff up."
It is interesting because
it's bringing people down.
It's too convoluted.
Yeah, it is interesting because they do kind of view like the idea that like we're gonna suffer, like we're fucked from the beginning, and there's certain ideas like even in like the idea of original sin kind of says that, where it's like, well, we're fucked from the get-go.
Well,
it's not our fault.
Even Nietzsche says that, really. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Life is suffering kind of a thing.
Buddhists say that, you know?
C-3PO says that.
Yeah.
Says it's our lot in life to suffer.
Okay.
He does say that, and he's correct.
He says it to R2-D2 in the original Star Wars.
He is correct.
I was too busy paying attention to all the Star Wars.
So, in the early Jewish beliefs...
Your robot religion?
Robot religion. It's all hell. It's very Gnostic.
God. Yeah,
they're like, when they're painful. Like the creator, they're like, oh, he's a bad guy.
Yeah, he's
Why
a
did he designed robots to feel pain?
Yeah.
He like oh, I can feel sand in my like gears and circuits and shit. It's like, why do they need that?
There's the one torture robot in Return of the Jedi, and he turns the other one upside down, and he's burning his feet.
And he's like,
steam shoots out. He has steam ports on his feet.
So he has like steam blood or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like, he's in pain. He's screaming.
So there's that one robot
that's
like
to feel pain.
That they tore apart.
There's one robot that's like the head torturer, right?
Yeah.
And he's a torture bot. He's designed to torture other robots.
He's a bartender in Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm. Well,
he's the bartender at Mos Eisley Cantina.
Sometimes you gotta, sometimes you gotta like go where the work is.
Well, it's a new lease on
this economy.
I like to think that robot, the one that was shooting steam, he was designed to be tortured.
Yeah.
Right.
I like that.
That's his only sole purpose. That's why he shoots steam out of his feet.
It's like, I'm the torture
He's a very
robot.
low pain tolerance and shoots steam out of his feet.
Yeah.
He's designed to be tortured by other robots.
Okay, let's unpack this really quick.
What I think masochist robot.
He doesn't enjoy it.
Torture is an acceptable punishment by law on that planet or in that area or whatever. However, if you can afford, if you're like a rich person, you can afford a proxy. And the guy's like, yeah, I keep on cheating on my taxes, so torture me about it. And
I just
here's
keep
my
paying
torture
this robot.
So they're like, he's like, I cheated on my taxes a lot. And they're like, well, we're going to torture you.
We're going to torture the shit out of your torture bot.
The Empire or whoever is doling out these punishments is like, man, we got to close this loophole.
I kind of think it's just at this point. I think it's just Jabba the Hutt. Like, I think he's running shit at that point.
Well, Jabba the Hutt's gang has to get their shit together.
I mean, the Empire technically has a lot to do. Like, they technically control Tatooine, but I think they're just like, let Jabba do his shit in that area.
Maybe Jabba is the one who manufactures the bots that are meant to be tortured.
Where do you think he got all his money?
Yeah, he's part of the circular economy. Yeah. He's like, exactly. I dare you to break the law. I win either way.
Yeah.
Anyway.
He is the law.
Back to the real stuff.
Yeah. It's not. This is all made up anyway, too.
Yeah.
Religion. Sorry. So old Jewish thinking has a kind of similar underworld where it's sort of like, just go there when you die, and they didn't really. I mean, I'm talking like Christianity, New Testament Jewish thinking.
At this point, like the idea of the underworld is not punitive in any sort of way.
Usually not. And I mean, you saw that in Tartarus and shit.
Yes, but not like it's the underworld is not inherently.
It's just kind of where you go. And actually, something I should have touched on in Greek mythology is the river Lethe, the river of forgetting. The idea of like kind of stop being existing was like you drink from that, you would forget your life on Earth, and you just kind of.
I went to the rendezvous and drank from the river of forgetting a few times.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah. So it's like that to me almost seems like their version of not existing anymore, as you drank from the river of Lethe or Lethe, however you want to say, and you just don't. You let your troubles just
drift away in the river.
Yeah.
But they.
Yeah, live that
right,
Jimmy
right.
Buffett lifestyle.
Oh, there, yeah. Real parrot heads there.
Yeah.
All the parrot heads go to hell. Or the underworld. Because everyone does. Yeah, there's a term or a word that appears in the Old Testament called Sheol. And it sometimes can be
go
described
to
as
the
hell,
Sheol.
but it can literally mean a grave or the pit. And sometimes it's used figuratively to talk about, like, you know, the afterlife, and like it can be described as suffering in a place of darkness, but it kind of literally means grave or a burial place. There is
pit.
hell-like imagery in the Old Testament, but the Old Testament is like Enoch specifically has some interesting things about seeing pillars of fire and shit, but they didn't view it as punitive, like you were saying. It didn't quite exist yet. And even in like Greek mythology, I don't really think they thought your average Joe, like even this guy's a criminal, he's probably just going to the underworld, right? Like they didn't Tartarus wasn't as like easy to get into as hell would be. Where it's almost
very
hard not to get to hell later on. So there's a lot to be said about hell in the New Testament, right? It still isn't quite viewed in the way that we view it now, and there's a lot of like sort of like looking and be like, okay, this means hell that's viewed later on, but it is mentioned many times in the New Testament, and it's often referred to in the original translation as a place called Gehenna. And Gehenna, which many of the translations and quotes I'm going to read later, when I say hell, they were actually saying the word Gehenna, which actually refers to like this valley that's like a garbage pit. And right outside of Jerusalem. It was basically junkyard.
It's a straight up landfill, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's what it is. And they would often throw the bodies of criminals on the fire there. So the idea of like being thrown to the flames, like criminals being thrown to the flames, was literally happening. I don't know if their bodies were alive or dead. I think they were probably dead. They probably crucified them. I don't know.
But like, it's not like a pick and pull where I could get like, you know, parts for like a 78 Nova or anything like that.
That's like actually that's a good question. Like at this period of time, and I'm talking pre-Surge Jerusalem, Jerry. Were the Romans crucifying people in Jerusalem, or
certainly?
So it was happening everywhere.
That was one of the Romans' favorite methods of torture and punishment was crucifixion. I mean,
the main character in the book I'm talking about.
Remember
Jesus,
when we talked about when we talked about Spartacus, how they lined the Appian Way with crucified.
So this is just
rebels.
happening all over the empire, right?
Oh, all over. It's horrifying to see. You know, it's a public horrific display of
how else are you
Rome's
supposed
power.
to crush dissent?
Yeah, right.
Well,
that's
it's
a
another
good
way
way
of
to
pissing
do
people
it.
off too.
That's a good way to do it.
You know, there was a lot of Jewish rebels at this period of time for this very reason.
If our government like crucified somebody, like I mean, I would be against that. I would not want that to happen. But if that happened, I'd be like, whatever they did, let's not do that. You know?
Yeah, exactly. I think that. I mean, there was a lot of, like I was saying, there was a lot of Jewish rebels, and at this point, like I'm talking like before the siege of Jerusalem, like Christians and Jews, there was like Jews that believed in the Messiah had come and all these things. Like there hadn't been quite as much of a separation at this point in time. So a lot of the people we're talking about.
Yeah, there were a bunch of different sects that were
exactly.
more Christian,
like,
more
so
Jewish.
many, like,
you know, a bunch of different ones. You know.
Yeah.
Around this time.
Gehenna, as I mentioned, that word appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke quite a bit. The synoptic gospels that all kind of tell the same story in different ways, right? Mark, for example, here's a great quote from Mark I want to read to just kind of get the ideas of what we're talking about. Mark is, out of those three, believed to be the first one written, though it's not the first. Matthew's the first book in the New Testament, but it's actually believed to be written after this. Mark, here we go. Mark 9:47 to 48. Quote, "And if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. It is better to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than to have two eyes and to be thrown into hell, where the worms that eat them do not die and the fire is not quenched." Right?
Badass.
Sounds like hell.
Yeah. Also could sound like being thrown in a garbage pyre.
Yeah.
Except they talk about it lasting forever now, right?
You'd pull out your own eye, because, at the end of the day, wouldn't you rather, you know?
Yeah.
That's basically
and they bring that up, like, I mean, the similar quotes about talking about, like, if your leg is, and it's a metaphor for like, if something is causing you to sin, get rid of it and suffer because of getting rid of it, because that is better than going to hell, essentially, is kind of what they're talking about. An interesting thing here is this is actually a reference to Isaiah from the Old Testament. Isaiah 66:24, quote, "And they will go out and look on the dead bodies of those who rebelled against me. The worms that eat them will not die. The fire that burns them will not be quenched. They will be loathsome to all mankind."
Ah, that's super
End
cool.
quote. Yeah, it's fucking hella metal.
Because it paints like it like paints a picture of like the garbage pit that you were talking about, but it does also conjure the image of like a rotting corpse, right?
Yeah.
With like the worms and stuff. Like we know what happens to a corpse, you know.
The worm thing that they brought up a few times. Sometimes that's translated. I should say that I'm using the New International Translation in all these cases.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Just because for
probably
some
the
sake
best
of
move.
consistency, and it feels a little more just like.
It's written in a way that's less annoying.
Yeah,
Unlike
I
King
just didn't want
James.
to say your ye's and your all the shit that's in the King James.
Well,
But the
and
New International Translation is the one I'm using, and maybe it's a little less colorful. But I mean, what I just fucking read, that's colorful as shit.
I'm going to say that the worms are very evocative, and they're mentioned frequently, and I think it might be because although a lot of scholars think bones were their money, I think that also the worms were their money. And they didn't mention in either of those passages how they pull your hair up but not out.
But not out. Yeah, I think you should leave. By the way, I want to leave this in. But if you've seen the new Ant-Man trailer, the dude from the one sketch, the
steering wheel coming off the car sketch.
it's like because if the steering wheel flies off, I'm toast. And it's like that. I think he's Cuban or Spanish or something. That guy's awesome.
Yeah.
And like he's in that. He's like, "Goodbye, Spider-Man." He says it to Ant-Man. It's really funny.
And Paul Rudd's
I followed that dude. Ruben. Oh fuck, what's his name? Ruben Rob. I'll look it up in a second. That dude. I follow him on Instagram, and he posted it. He posted the and I go.
He's
I
like,
like to
I'm
think
in
that.
the Ant-Man.
I like to think that guy's the same character as the focus group sketch.
Oh yeah.
He's like.
So technically, I think you should leave now is inside the Marvel.
I think you should leave
Universe.
as Marvel canon, is what I'm saying.
Okay, I'm into it.
And actually, Patty Harrison.
Now we're cooking.
Is in both.
Yeah, she's in She-Hulk.
And do you think the character she's in She-Hulk in is the same lady who had who was in the driving videos about how
her job is tables.
Yeah, her job is tables. Okay, yeah, perfect. No,
In
you're
fact,
right.
she didn't have to pay. She didn't have to pay for the wedding at the tables at her wedding because that's her job.
I think
yes.
What's his name? Peyton Reed really wants comedy people to like him because he put Greg Turkington in Ant-Man.
I think he's a fan of Tim and Eric and.
Yeah, I
Might
think
be
he's a
friends
fan of
with them.
Yeah.
You know?
I like
he's
to
a
think
fan
that
of
he's
those
not,
shows.
but he really wants them to like him, so he keeps putting them in his movies, being like, "So we're gonna hang out
They're in
after
his
the shoot,
movies.
right?" And they're like, "No, we
I mean,
gotta."
Greg Turkleton is in that trailer too, so they brought him back.
Oh
That's
yeah,
great.
yeah, he's still the manager of Baskin Robbins.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So moving on, I read a quote from Mark, which I said that was thought to be the first of those three synoptic gospels. An interesting thing happens between that writing of that book and the writing of like Luke and Matthew, what is called the Siege of Jerusalem in 17 CE.
I thought Matthew was first, and then
I actually looked it up, and actually
Okay.
Matthew has a ton of fire and brimstone shit,
Okay,
Pharisees
okay.
and all that fucking shit. He's
Okay.
first, it's the first book of the New Testament, but it was actually believed to be written later. These things are kind of hard to say, like
It's like
whenever
a
you look up,
prequel.
like kind of, yeah, but they're all kind of telling more or less the same story of Jesus, just in various different ways.
Yeah,
It's like House
from
of
different
Dragon.
point of views.
Luke and Matthew have a lot of like more like fire and brimstone anger. It feels like.
And so why does it have the fire and brimstone and anger in it?
Well, you know a lot more about the Siege of Jerusalem than I do. I will
Yeah.
admit that.
Yes.
I do know that it was Jerusalem at the time, and we were talking about this before, where it's like crucifixions in Jerusalem. Like, there's a reason like that. Maybe that pisses people off.
Well-
Jerusalem at the time, and correct me if I'm wrong, was kind of sort of a headquarters in a way of like Jewish rebels, right?
Well,
Against Rome.
pretty
Like
much.
Springsteen.
pretty much all of Judea was that way.
Yeah.
Even in Syria, you see it. What's crazy is I just like to think about how this enters into the lexicon, right? Of like Romans evil, we're good. This is a time where we were victimized, and something that is at the forefront of that is crucifixion. You know what I mean? So to me, it's not a coincidence that,
I think that
Jesus was crucified, right?
Right.
And yeah, you know what I mean. We're
It
purely
really
secular
does.
here, guys. If you
Yeah,
haven't got
that's
that
something
already.
actually. Yeah, maybe it should have said coming up. Like, I didn't go to church, go to school.
Yeah.
When I was a kid. So this comes from a very secular, admittedly atheist viewpoint.
Yes.
I am trying to be respectful of it, but ultimately this is a work of entertainment. I'm doing my best.
And let's be real here. We don't believe in any of that. I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a lot of other podcasts that will tell you the straight story and tell you, as if it were real or whatnot. You can go listen to those. You don't have to listen to us.
And please do.
Yeah, we're not going to entertain. Like I don't know when you're looking at like religious texts as also historical texts, because there's things like that, right, that can be gleaned from those theological texts. Like a notice, like a marked difference between the books, right?
Yeah.
Like pre and post the year 70, right? That is stuff where you can be like, well, this comes from, this area, so you can really understand sort of the zeitgeist of the time,
Yeah, and I mean, there was that quote I brought up from Mark about the worm and shit, but remember, it is referencing the Old Testament.
Right, right.
Now you see books by Matthew and Luke seem a little angrier. And actually, here's a quote from Gospel of Luke 12:5. Quote, "But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who, after your body has been killed, has the authority to throw you into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him." Right?
Yeah. And that
seems angrier.
Yeah. Now, who's he talking to? Like, what's the context of that?
This is it's Jesus talking.
Right.
Jesus.
So
talking.
Jesus is telling people that he's laying down the law.
He's like, motherfucker.
Yeah.
If you
he's
don't
throwing the hammer down.
If you don't straighten up and fly straight, motherfucker,
The devil.
Yeah.
you're going to hell.
Yeah.
And you should be afraid of God because he's mad after
My
what you
dad
did.
is
These people, it's believed
My
these people
dad.
lived through. They were alive during the siege of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Jerusalem. They didn't hear about it.
Right.
Like, I mean, maybe they weren't in Jerusalem. I don't fucking know. There's
Yeah.
a lot of there's so many contradicting ideas about who these people were, and I'm not going to get in all of it because I'm here to talk about hell, gang.
Right.
Yeah.
It's true.
I'm not
it's
a fucking
true.
preacher.
Yeah. We're not theologians either.
Matthew.
You got to go to
not
the
at all.
Theology Boys for that one.
Yeah.
We're a comedy history podcast. Comedy comes first, gang.
The theology boys aren't that funny. I've listened to them.
Very accurate. They really know their stuff, but it's a very dry listen.
No humor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very informative though.
Yeah.
Occasionally they make a Three Stooges reference. And they explain to you how those three guys and occasionally Shem really egregiously injured one another, and then they just say, well, it's probably a sin, so we should probably move on.
All right, so the Book of Matthew, gang.
Tell us why the Who's on First sketch is funny. So this is why it's funny, because it's,
Yeah.
He doesn't realize that who is a person, that he thinks that he's asking
Well, that's a joke. It's a
question.
miscommunication. Have you ever seen the Kids in the Hall sketch where he's like, oh, I see, and it totally ruins the sketch? It's really
it's
funny.
great, yeah.
He's like,
anyway.
his name is like Henry who, right? Like, or whatever.
Yeah.
All right, gang. Book of Matthew. This is where Matthew's pissed, frankly.
Oh, yeah.
Matthew has some beautiful fucking angry language that I really, really enjoy. And I'm going to read you a few quotes if you don't mind.
Oh, by the way, Chris,
do it.
Book of Matthew is my favorite of the Gospels because it's
for the
so
exact
gnarly.
reason I'm about to say.
Because it's so
Dude's
angry.
pissed.
It's metal in places.
Matthew 13:40-42. Quote, "As the seeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil, and they will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
That's the best
The weeping
one.
and gnashing of teeth.
The weeping
That-
of gnashing of teeth comes up a lot. That specific
Gnashing?
phrase,
Yeah.
which it tells a story. Right?
Yeah.
And you can
Yeah.
also see in this one just descriptions of the end of days.
Yeah.
You know, the last testament, the final judgment. You know,
I feel like I want to say
Arnold
me
Schwarzenegger.
and friend of the show Jenny would often, like, when referring to like just having a bad day or like having to go work, like while we were hungover, talking about how there would be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
yeah.
That's fantastic.
Pretty frequently.
I've been
Back
there.
in the,
That is a
back in the
great,
ding-dong
it's such a
drizzle.
beautiful descriptive phrase.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
it's hella brutal.
Yeah.
Metalocalypse would love this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Death clock. All right, Matthew 23:33. Quote, I like this one. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? End quote. So,
So now hell is more punitive now, right? Hell is more
Exactly.
punitive, and you're burning now.
yeah, it's punishing. You're
Yeah.
punished, right?
Yeah.
These guys are mad, and I think that anger from the siege of Jerusalem actually probably has a lot to do, like, with our modern
the
interpretation of
why-
hell.
Right. With how they're.
The other thing
writing-
is, like, another way that
writing
when
these
the
things.
brood of vipers, some of the translations describe that as generation of vipers, right? So it's almost like talking about, like, this generation, you group of people, fucked up.
Right.
You're currently you're currently in the fucking around stage.
Yeah.
When you at death, you will be in the finding out
Finding
stage.
out. Yes.
You know what I'm saying? That's
Yeah.
essentially what he's saying. And you know, these people hated Rome, and
Yeah.
so on. And you're going to keep seeing more of that. Matthew 25:30. You're going to see. Here we go. And throw that worthless servant aside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Bring it up again. Matthew 25:41. Then he will say, those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal hellfire, prepared for the devil and his angels.
Ah.
Now,
Ladies to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here
Yes.
I am, stuck in the movie, or whatever that is.
I know, I thought that too.
Meanwhile, I'm weeping and I'm gnashing my teeth.
Yeah.
Well, so another thing about that is
Stuck in a
it specifically refer the devil and his angels, and sometimes that's translated as Satan and his demons. But it
Yeah.
is specifically, you see referencing the devil and Satan as a fallen angel, essentially.
Right.
Which it happens quite a bit in the Bible, but really you get a taste of that
'Cause they're
later
fallen
on by a lot
angels.
of really great writers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the Book of Revelations. I've been dying to talk about it. I've been dying to talk about the Book of Revelations.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
The
I'm
old
not going
Book
to
of
get into
Revs.
there's all the shit
Dude, it's
that happens in
bonkers.
that.
It's wall to wall bonkers shit.
But it
man.
is a story about the end of days. It's basically
Chris-
describing the apocalypse, the final battle between heaven and hell. Satan rises up. Though there's a lot of stories about Satan being defeated earlier. Now he's rising up again,
Yeah.
and he's gonna try to win, and he doesn't. And but there's so many things that happen, millenniums and all this fucking shit. It's a crazy fucking book. I'm not gonna get into all of it, but
Maybe he's also talking about the fall of Rome.
yeah,
Maybe he's
exactly.
also
That's
talking
exactly
about
what I'm getting into.
Yeah.
So
The
this-
Millennium.
Ah. Or
The Millennium.
or how about this?
The Newmanium.
Newmanium.
Yes.
Huh?
Yeah.
Huh?
Or the new Manium.
Yeah.
So an
I'm
interesting thing
getting
about
all
like,
revved up too, and by revved I mean Revelations.
revved up into the revelations. They're not frightened by my revelations.
yeah.
I'm not yet.
So the apocalypse, sort of the return of Christ to, do his thing, fight evil. It's talked about quite a bit in the.
Yeah.
It's a little. There's a little things about it, sort of referencing it in the Old Testament, but obviously it was more of a Messiah, but not a Jesus Christ himself. Matthew, for example, talks about. Here's a quote. Matthew 24:36. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father, right? So he's talking
Right.
about an earlier quote. The first quote from Matthew I brought up clearly was referencing the end of days as well.
Yeah.
There's a great there's a great Holy Roller song that I listen to. I don't know why that Spotify gave me all these Holy Roller songs, but one of them is
You
called.
listen to him.
I like them because it's.
I get it.
I don't.
Oh,
It's,
yeah.
it's so bizarre to me, and for some reason I love it. Songs singing about hellfire from the Christian perspective, I just find very entertaining.
Oh, absolutely.
But that is a line in it, like not even like it's this lady with like this like Midwest accent, like not even the Father knows. You know, like
Are they quoting
no one knew
that?
what was gonna happen.
Yeah.
You know.
So the Book of Revelations was written. It was also written after the siege of Jerusalem, and it contains a lot of anger towards Rome, but it's less specific.
Yeah.
It's
like,
believed to be written by a guy
writing
named
code.
John of Patmos. Formerly, I think when they were putting together the canon, they thought it was actually Gospel of John, but
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
pretty
they thought it was John.
pretty universally believed. That's the thing is like the other thing about like anything I bring up, there's some theologian or historian who disagrees with it. Like all this
Oh my
shit
God, yeah.
is so.
It's
You can find something that will discredit every fucking thing I've said this entire
every little
episode.
thing, dude. Every
go ahead, do it. I don't give a
little
shit.
Thing, you know what I mean?
Two
Like,
Johns?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's John the Baptist.
Dude, there's a
more
shit
Johns.
ton of Johns, man. There's
Yeah.
so many goddamn
Our
Johns.
cat was named John. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was the good one.
Yeah, I agreed. John
Yeah.
of Patmos, guys. He was exiled to the island of Patmos, where they believe he wrote this. I've heard things about him writing it in a cave, but I think that's made up.
Or that he
Caves on
got
Patmos.
super stoned and wrote it.
Yeah, I've heard
Yeah.
that too. I don't know.
Yeah.
I like
I've
that.
heard all sorts of stuff.
It's just
Or
so
that
such a
starved
bonkers
him-
story.
He starved himself or something.
Yeah. That may be true.
He was like fasting and saw a vision.
It is absolutely written as a criticism of Rome. So you have like,
Yeah.
it's believed that things like the seven-headed dragon are referencing the seven hills of Rome.
Does
know.
anyone, by the way, know the Seven Hills of Rome?
No, fuck no.
What do I look
I-
like? John passing to the left?
I did enough research for this fucking thing. I'm not Googling what are the seven hills of Rome.
Okay, let's see.
There's the
The Bronx, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, Long Island, and New Jersey. Boom.
I could only remember a couple. To be fair, the only couple I could remember were the Capitoline Hill, the Palatine Hill, the Aventine Hill, the Esquiline Hill, the Viminial Hill, and the Quirinial Hill. I could only remember two though. So
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't
those
know.
are all the hills of Rome.
I guess Palantine, Palpatine.
The Palatine,
Palpatine Hill.
the Palatine,
Palpatine.
and the Capitoline are like the most important hills,
Yeah.
I guess.
The Book of Revelations contains a lot of imagery that you actually has been continued, like a lake of fire, right?
Right, yeah.
That's been brought up in other things, but that very specifically, he talks about apocalyptically a lake of fire.
Brought
is,
to you by ExxonMobil.
Yeah, right.
popularly
Yeah, exactly.
understood from the Book of Revelations. The four Horsemen, that's straight up out of that book.
Yeah.
That dude just made that up.
He made that
it's
up.
very,
because it's fucking badass.
it's badass as fuck.
He's like
talks a lot
four
about
horsemen.
the Antichrist running shit.
Yeah, he's
Antichrist
playing-
is brought up
He's
multiple
he's
times in
playing
the New
like
Testament.
a Gretsch, and he's
Oh
like,
yeah, rock and roll.
Well, I mean, you got Anthony Fauci. He's clearly pestilence or plague, right? And then
Yeah.
let's see who else we got. War,
What is it good for?
absolutely nothing.
I don't know, Putin. Like
maybe that's
any
Putin.
At any time, at any generation, I could equate the Four Horsemen to literally any figure that you throw at me. Give
Yeah.
me any year, and I'll give you four horsemen.
That's because
of
people
the
are always dealing
apocalypse.
with this shit.
Well,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of money to be made in telling people that the end times are coming. You know?
Well, and I would pitch a couple of dates near the end of the 80s, early 90s, but I'm sick of you bashing the cast of Cheers. It's a good show. I like it. Chris is indifferent. He's let us know, but I don't understand why you dislike Norm and Ted Danson and the rest of them.
What's
Because
Norm's
Ted
friend's
Danson
name?
clearly rides upon a pale horse.
Oh yeah,
And Hill
Well, I
follows
mean-
with
And
him.
Hill follows with him.
he is the pale horse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tie into our Wyatt Earp series.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of crazy imagery in that. Lots of great beasts. Jesus shoots swords out of his mouth. It's pretty fucking rock and roll. You got the
Rad.
fucking whore of Babylon doing all kinds of bullshit. She's
it's fucking
great.
Mad
Love
Max
her.
in
Big
there,
fan.
dude.
Yeah, it's
Wait,
seven
can we
seals,
talk more
all this
about
shit.
Jesus shooting swords out of his mouth?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's their.
He shoots swords out of his mouth.
It's their Mad Max, man.
Yeah, exactly.
I just like that Jesus is like, I don't like believe in violence or anything, and I'm gonna die for everyone's sins. And then when he comes back, he's like, pretty much like a powered
"Go,
up
go,
sword
go."
from Legend of Zelda.
Yeah.
He's like chunk, chunk, chunk.
Wait, have
Well,
you ever seen
he was saying that before he got crucified, to be fair.
Have you ever seen Last Temptation of Christ?
I actually haven't.
No.
Oh, so there's a part in it. Willem Dafoe, of course, plays Jesus, but he goes, "I used to preach love and understanding. Now I preach with this," and he holds up an axe.
Oh, I was hoping
It's
cocks his
badass.
shotgun.
I just want him to be like, I'm something of a messiah myself. And a sword comes out of his mouth.
Don't tell Harry.
Yeah.
It's like fucking
tell Harry.
special makeup effects by fucking Tom
He tries to shoot
Savini.
a sword at Spider-Man, and Spider-Man ducks it and it flies around and stabs him in the gut.
It's like-
Now we're
he's
cooking
like,
with gas.
Oh.
Yeah. There's a part
Spider-Man
where it cuts and
fighting
he goes,
Jesus?
"Oh, yeah."
Yeah, we all know what side of the war at the end of days Spider-Man's gonna be on.
Well, I'm on Spider-Man's side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't know about you guys.
Why do you think we're
Anyway.
red? You know?
Yeah.
Colors of hell.
Badass.
Yeah, speaking of Jesus being kick-ass and badass, are you guys... I kind of briefly talked about the idea earlier of a harrowing of hell. The idea of going into hell and bringing back
Taking.
people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Are you how familiar are you about Jesus doing this? Have you guys heard about this?
No.
It was in the canon for quite some time.
No,
So
no.
there's a,
I always heard that. So Jesus just had to simply spend a couple of days in hell to know what it's like. Is sort of what I got from it.
There's a lot of, there's a lot of stories about this. Essentially, the sort of one of the main canon, they do bring it up that he goes down there, right? Because he's sinful, I assume. I don't know. I think it's more later on in sort of medieval where it starts to be like he's bringing back, because essentially what this does. So I'll describe what the idea is. That Jesus is crucified
Right.
on Good Friday. And then is resurrected on Easter Sunday. Between that time, he's kicking it in hell, and he's actually going down there and he's saving all the people in limbo who are essentially, they would be in heaven if they were born before Jesus Christ. So we're talking like, you're Abraham.
Oh, so they made up a story to deal
Yeah.
with that.
It's exactly what it is. So they talk about how all these guys are actually in limbo. They're not in heaven or hell. And
okay.
limbo almost is kind of just like the underworlds we were talking earlier, like the Mesopotamian Greek, all that shit, where it just kind of was it's the land of the dead.
Yeah.
That's where these people went. Sheol,
It's-
you can even say it is. So he
It's
goes down
straight
there.
up a retcon to fix continuity errors.
Oh,
It is. That's what.
there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
There's absolutely a lot of that, and it's still like
By the way,
they even talk about like
I just think it's funny that, if Jesus were to come back, it's like, oh, so you're all just wearing a picture of me crucified, huh? That's okay. And what do you call the day I was crucified on? A Good Friday?
Go fuck yourself.
Okay, am I in the right
That's the
place
worst Friday
here?
of my life.
Are the Romans still here?
Well, yeah.
And you guys give each other presents on my birthday?
Yeah, but I don't
Yeah,
get
some
anything.
bullshit.
What the hell?
Yeah. So, Matthew even referenced, the idea of holy people who have died raised to life, They came to the tombs after Jesus' resurrection, that kind of thing. That isn't saying that Jesus went down to hell and saved them, but it's saying that happened, right?
It's saying that he went down to Georgia.
He definitely went down to Georgia. Jesus went down to
Jesus went down to Georgia. Yeah, he was looking for a soul to steal.
Georgia. You did see this idea
Looking to
in
it for a soul to save.
pre-New Testament Jewish belief, like as far as like in 100 BC, there's a book called the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs that talks about the Messiah to be going down to the kingdom of Baal, like Baal, and doing these same things. So this isn't a new story. They're just kind of picking it. And in the 3rd century, the teachings of Sylvanus and the Gospel of Bartholomew, who reference these stories and turn them into now being about Jesus, right? So that Messiah to be, these guys kind of retake that story from the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, and they make it looks as like, okay, that's when they were talking about the Messiah be, that now is our boy Jesus. And this was kind of not until like the 3rd century.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like how they took the plot line from Superman 2 and made it Spider-Man 2, where he like loses his powers, and then his will to be the hero is how he gets it back.
Yeah, same thing happens with Jesus. I'm sure
It's like a crisis, like an existential crisis.
it's all part of the all part of the collective subconscious, universal.
Everyone goes through it.
Theology cinematic universe.
Yes,
In just the human being alive at any point in time universe.
In the 5th century, the Gospel of Nicodemus, I hope that's how you get pronounced.
Wait.
I didn't look it up.
Okay, yeah.
5th century, Gospel of Nicodemus, maybe,
I think it's
specifically
Nicodemus.
talks about the story of the harrowing of hell, in which 2 sons of Simeon the high priest, who have been risen by the dead, are able to watch Jesus going down to hell, battling Satan and his demons. He battles Hades, who as
He's
death.
still
Remember
there.
we were talking about that?
Yeah.
Hades is
so
actually
Hades is still there.
What's that?
So Hades is still hanging out there.
Oh, Hades is there, dog. Hades is there. Yes. Hades is down there. He's been down there the whole time. He's just
Yeah,
kidding.
we forgot to get rid of him, to be honest
like,
with
shit.
you. Yeah, we didn't take him out.
It's the
We'll
problem
take him out
is
later.
it's a lifetime job like the Supreme Court, except he's immortal.
Yeah.
They fucked that
Yeah.
up. You can't get rid of him.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say except he's moral. And that's why it was different than the Supreme Court.
Well, that is
I
true.
got
too.
half of you. I got
I
half
see
of
what
you.
you did
Not the
there.
half that's good.
Yeah.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, and in this story specifically, it talks about the revered figures from the Old Testament being brought back to heaven finally. So Jesus kind of goes down there and saves all the dudes, all the old heroes from the Old Testament Bible, and now these guys get to go to heaven, right?
So like Moses.
Yeah, Moses, your whole
Doesn't
gang.
Moses Moses get like a golden key into heaven? Like, didn't he part the waves? Didn't he actually talk with the man? Like, didn't he actually talk with God? Like,
Well,
isn't he just sort
heaven
of
was-
like in?
Jerry, you can't get to heaven without the love of Christ. Christ
Dear,
hadn't gone down to
come
earth
on.
yet. Come on, Jerry.
It's Moses. What about Noah? Does Noah
Yeah.
get in?
Nobody,
He saved everything on this
Jerry.
planet.
nobody is exempt from cardinal sin, Jerry.
Dear Lord.
Which actually leads me to my
fucked
next point. In the late days of the Roman Empire, there's a dude named Saint Augustine.
Yes.
I like to think of him as kind of a reverse Gnostic, in the sense that he
Okay.
actually viewed an inherent good from nature, and
Right.
suffering itself comes from morality, and more specifically, original sin.
That's how you
Than
get
it
that
does
sainthood.
inherent, right? So,
Inherent
like,
sin,
as I
yeah.
was saying, the Gnostics were just like, it's all evil, it's all fucked. Augustine,
He's like, it's all good.
well, not
Except the stuff
exactly,
that's sin.
quite exactly.
He's not
the
quite
opposite.
the dude.
Nature is good.
He looked at Rome even at the time, even though at his point in time Rome had become Christian. You know, they still viewed things as like, well, if you're an emperor or you're rich because your divinity makes it so. And he's like, no, that's some bullshit. Essentially, like he was like, no, there's all the suffering and all this shit that's happening, and money has nothing to do with it. It's happening because of original sin, and all you can do is try to live a moral and good life and go to heaven, and that's when you'll be sort of that's where you'll get paradise. That's where you'll achieve fulfillment, not on earth. Right?
He's like the king's a piece of shit. It's Hogman that we should be down with.
Yeah.
Hogman who sleeps in the slop lives a humble life.
Sorry, when does lives a humble life? Sorry, when did Saint Augustine exist again?
354 CE to 430 CE.
Okay, 5th
80.
century. So Rome isn't over.
No.
but it's past Constantine.
He's watching it wane. right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he doesn't care for it one bit. He's in Hippo, in the coast of northern Africa, tending to all sorts of people. A bunch of people come in and they raid his town and trash it and destroy everything except his temple, and they, because they respected him, because they were like, this dude cares about people. A lot of what I was saying about like the idea of, some people say that he came up with the term original sin, and then I've also read that it kind of was thought, like the term was mentioned before, so I've kind of heard both. Maybe he didn't come up with it, maybe he made it popular, but it's sort of like the original sin, and I guess I haven't said, I just assume everyone knows, it's the eating of the forbidden fruit. It's you know, Adam and Eve ejected from the Garden of Eden, ejected from paradise.
Inherent vice.
This happens. When I talk about Paradise Lost, it specifically retells the story almost from Satan's point of view, which is going to be super metal and interesting.
Well, it's not to be mistaken with the only Christian gentleman's magazine, Original Skin. There's no nudity in it. There's some ankles, some really nice forearms, and a lot of really pretty smiles, ladies. So, you know, good job.
Dear Lord.
So
I read it for the passages.
Yeah, she's driving a motor car.
He, in his work, The City of God, is a quote I like a lot, because he talks about hell being very real, right? And your going there is based off of your morality. He believed that baptism alone wouldn't save your soul, but it was necessary. It was just the opening of the gate, as it were, right? It was sort of like okay, I'm ready to be forgiven of the original sin. That's what baptism in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ was. But hell was a very real place, and if you didn't live in the way that you should, you will go there, right?
Yeah.
I kind of think that, like, as Rome waned and Christianity kind of took over in the Middle Ages, that I have to think that his writings seem to really resonate with people. The ideas of the ways that people, like the Romans thought, where it was like fulfillment on earth, even in Christianity, that idea didn't quite go away. It was a very Platonic way of thinking, right?
Right.
Because he didn't view it that way. And as I think that society crumbles apart and everybody's suffering, it's easy to be like, hey, how am I supposed to, there's no way I'm finding fulfillment. It almost feels better to be like, hey, yeah, life sucks, it's hard, it's brutal, but it's not your fault. It is your responsibility, much like mental illness.
But it's not your fault.
Fulfillment isn't meant to happen now.
Right. And
so to people
guess
who's
what? After this, it's going to be great. It's going to be so good.
That's exactly.
Just bear with me, you know?
Augustine really, I think, like, it almost seems like he's speaking about Christianity all the way till now, at this point, right? Those ideas are still present, right? And I think that, like I was saying, between, you know, him and, like, when things started to actually kind of, like during this time of Charlemagne, where people were actually starting to build their societies up a little more, it seemed like those were the ideas just bouncing around Europe, and that was kind of it. You know, people are too busy suffering to come up with new ideas. you know.
Well, you need a reason to, like, you know, be the hog man. You know, when you see like kings and people with money, and that's not most people, and you're like, I gotta have a reason to keep going because this is just fucking.
And these, and in even like the early Middle Ages, like, and up until. There isn't a lot of change in the view of hell. It's just a lot of idea of suffering, weeping and gnashing of teeth, which never like it's easy to imagine that when you're dealing with that in your day-to-day life.
I mean, there's not a lot of changes in human life, you know what I mean, in your day-to-day life. Not a lot of change for like a really long time, you know?
I mean, wouldn't you say like the biggest thing to it kind of like, I think of philosophy and kind of thinking, hey, maybe we should do things different. That exists when people are comfortable. That exists at times of prosperity, right? It doesn't exist when whether you have a good yield of crops is going to be survival or death.
Yeah, when an empire falls away and what's left is this power vacuum with all of these people trying to fill it. And you just have decades of nonstop war, you know, and just it's bad.
It's really easy to fear God and fear damnation of hell, and like that feels very real to these people. So I think that being, like I said, like the idea of like the Roman idea of finding fulfillment on Earth almost felt impossible to people.
Yeah.
Right.
They couldn't relate
Oh,
to
yeah.
that. They're like,
There's
no,
no way.
this fucking sucks.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to enjoy this? So the idea of this other guy saying,
How am I supposed to enjoy this?
Yeah,
I just
exactly.
pictured like a guy like sitting in like a pig pen, and he's like,
well, it's like, yeah, the
not
hedonists of
again.
Rome.
You know,
How are you a hedonist in this time period?
fourth time this week. You know?
How am I supposed to invent the concept of zero? I'm so hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, Tyler, because the Muslim world was entering a golden age at this
Yeah.
time, you know, and preserving
That's why they
the
got there
world's thought.
first.
Well, if you remember, this is the time where they fucking burnt down Zoroastrianism. Right now.
Oh, yeah. But they
yeah,
kept,
I brought
they
that
kept
up,
the
but it's like-
libraries and, you know,
It,
in Spain
mean,
at least,
that-
you know, in Spain it was amazing, you know.
Yeah.
Rome may have been falling, but my goodness, you know.
yeah. So, the Middle Ages, I'm kind of gonna gloss over to a degree, but you know, hellfire sermons really became popular. You start seeing hell in art, and this is, and you know, mystery plays would actually show hell as like in humorous depictions sometimes, which is interesting because you wouldn't think so, but I think it's it's macabre, right?
Dark
It's,
humor type.
It's dark
type of
humor. It's
thing.
gallows humor. Like
Yeah.
it's just a way of getting fucking by, you know. And I
Yeah.
relate to that. That's a lot of times why I like dark humor.
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's a
Totally.
coping
Certain
mechanism.
ideas, like
Yeah.
you see certain ideas appearing in art, like the jaws of hell, where like the maw, like hell being like jaws that are coming down
Yeah.
on people. And I always
Yeah.
wonder if that idea comes from the gnashing of teeth that we
Ah.
read about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
So I
I'd
was
like
like
to
wondering
think-
if like, you know, basically we go into this time period where everybody's suffering. They're probably not reading the Bible. Like, be honest.
Those are the gnashing teeth I heard about in the Bible.
I was like, yeah. So you see this in artworks, and like, there's some great like, very like early like medieval like, you know, those manuscript things.
Yeah.
There's a really where it's like writing and then picture. You know what I'm talking about?
Kinda,
I'd really
like,
like to show some of this
perspective
art,
kinda sucks.
maybe on the Discord. And
Yeah.
some of it you'll recognize, but some of the earlier
Totally.
stuff. There's actually a story called The Vision of Tyndall. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And I actually didn't write the name of the original name. It's like, screw it, whatever. It's believed to be written in about 1149 from Tyndall himself, talking about how he had a vision of hell, right?
Okay.
And it's
Okay.
one of those things where, like, so basically in the story, you know, he's a guy, he runs around, he does what he wants, right?
Yeah,
he lives
yes.
hedonistically, which is probably not easy,
Yeah.
but he's just fucking and stealing cows and doing whatever the fuck he
Cool.
wants all the time.
Sounds
And he gets
awesome.
in an argument with somebody, and he fucking passes out. Maybe he has a stroke. They didn't know what strokes were at the time, but it kind of seems like they're describing a stroke.
Like, oh, suddenly.
And then his spirit goes down to hell. And it starts being guided by this angel who comes down here and is like basically showing all these, like, here's all these people suffering, burning on grills and all this shit. That you see weeping and gnashing of
fuck.
teeth. You see
Yeah.
jaws and like fire and brimstone and all the. There's so
wait.
much imagery.
Are they? They're like, here's the jaws of hell. They actually take people and put them into crushed cars that they can't get out of.
Well, there's even a part. Well, the thing is, like, as he's down there, like, and this is different from Dante because I think Dante saw himself as kind of a little more pure, but like he's actually having to live some of these sufferings. Like the angel's like, here you go, and he like fucks off. The angel fucks off at one time, and he ends up like in the jaws, and he's like, oh no, and then the angel comes back and he's like, sorry about that, and you know. Could take a leak. I don't know
And
what
then
he's doing.
then the angel makes him eat like tons of donuts and uses his head as a bowling ball.
Yeah, some of the
But only in the
images in
deleted
this.
scenes.
Yeah, that is true. I remember that so well because they put that in another episode.
Yeah, it was in the clip show. Yeah.
In some of the things he has to do in hell, he has to walk down this like tiny little bridge. This like I think it's like an inch wide. And it's covered in nails, and he has to push a cow down it. You know, and he's like stepping on nails and shit. And he makes it, and I think the angel like heals him, and then he sees a giant iron bird eating people and shitting them out. You know,
Fucking badass.
yeah,
Damn.
and that actually comes up really soon in a really interesting way. So this was so popular in this period of time. It got translated into a ton of languages. People fucking loved it. It's weird because nobody fucking knows about it now. Though some of those pictures from the manuscript I kind of recognized. They're very like it's an old fucking story. Very
It's
much
like
played
that
on
movie
it.
Heaven
Yeah,
is
check this
Real,
out.
but it's like the shitty, way darker version.
Hell is
Yeah.
real. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, and it's like, I mean, I haven't read it itself, but I've read the Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
It was in the book I read that talked about this, but it's really interesting because like nobody fucking knows about that story now.
No,
but
I've never
remained
heard of it.
popular.
Yeah.
So around this time, actually, the church finally now recognized in 1253 the idea of purgatory, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Purgatory is basically, it's like a third place in between heaven and hell.
Yeah.
Where you're a piece of shit, but not that big a piece of shit. Similar to kind of what Plato was talking about, or Socrates talking about, the idea of like going down there, being punished, and then it burns away your sin enough that now you can go into heaven. And I think part of the reason they did this is people were like, well, I can't live up to this heaven shit. This,
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like,
like-
I'm going to go to hell anyway. Why am I doing
So-
this? And it's sort of
so
a way
how-
to get people into the church. Where like, well, there is a way, and that's kind of how I view it. Where it's
So
like,
how? Wait a minute. So like, how bad is purgatory? Like I've heard it described like it's just a black pit or something. You gotta spend a certain amount of time.
I mean, I
there.
think there's a lot of different depictions of it, and I mean that's the thing about hell itself is it's like every author has its own version
like
of
spin.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's really not until like Milton and Dante that we kind of view a little more specific. But even now, like to this day, you have various depictions of it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Purgatory even more so. I mean, and I will get into it very soon, but like Purgatory, that's the basis of Dante's second book after Inferno,
Right.
like second
Right.
part of that story, which I have never read because I got bored. But I've read Inferno, and it's very interesting. But everyone, that's the one. Everyone knows Dante's Inferno. Then there's Purgatorio and Paradiso, and
Yeah, I tried
know.
reading Paradiso and failed.
who cares?
I failed.
Yeah, I did.
There's
I failed
just
too.
not
I failed
enough,
miserably. But that's the story of heaven and purgatory, and I'm here to tell you the story about hell.
Yeah.
In the 14th century, we have what is known as the Black Death, the plague. Again, suffering. Not a lot changes. One interesting thing that really
Shit
comes out of
sucks.
here is I think the modern interpretation of the Grim Reaper
Yeah.
is really comes out at this point. The idea of death as personification has always existed. And
Yeah.
I think even like in the story I was talking about earlier, where like Hades, Jesus goes down, roughs up Hades, he's depicted as sort of the personification of death in a way. And then you had Thanatos in ancient Greece and all this stuff. Like that's been a common thing. Like, but
Yeah,
the
they've-
personification of these ideas has always existed.
Yeah, like death is like personified as always just sort of a skeleton face.
Yeah,
or
and then now
a
the
skull.
skeleton version with a scythe,
Yeah,
which is
the
badass.
harvest
Scythes are
of
badass.
souls. Yeah,
Our fans
totally.
know about that.
Oh yeah,
they know
absolutely.
how much we love them.
Welcome
Scythes
to
of
the
rock and roll.
Scythe Cast.
This is where you were. I mean, yeah, death with the scythes was something you already saw at this point, but like the very specific black robes, I mean, started to appear at this time. I mean, you'd see other versions. You'd see just a skeleton. You'd see, all kinds of things, but like the Black Death kind of helped people put a face to the suffering that they were feeling. Different
Right.
areas had different deaths. Like some places had a more like a female death or whatever. Like, but you
Where-
really
Some
where
started to
places
see.
had
wait.
William Sadler-esque death.
What's that?
William Sadler-esque. Where had
Oh, throughout
more
Europe,
female-
it was different from place to place. I know, like Poland had death. You viewed death as like an old woman, for example.
Oh, okay.
And it was just all
Crone.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
An old crone, yeah.
Yeah.
However, as the Renaissance starts to happen, it's interesting because again, as people start to suffer less, some of the stories become less brutal. Like
Right.
you start seeing hell in art a lot more. I know we already were talking about seeing it, but like a lot paintings of like the Last Judgment by people like Jan van Eyck and Hans Memling.
Yep.
I don't know how to pronounce it. Derek Boots is what it looks like. I know that's not right.
Yeah.
Have all these altar paintings of hell that are like beautiful, but they look so much better than fucking Homeboy who did the Tyndall paintings, whose name was Simon Marmion. I forgot to mention that. Marmion.
Marmion.
He's the one who
Yeah.
did in the Tyndall story. He's the
Oh,
one
yeah.
who did that. I forgot to mention that.
Okay.
With all that
And at this
teeth?
time, you see our homeboy Hieronymus Bach. Hieronymus Bosch.
Hieronymus,
Sorry,
Yeah.
Hieronymus Bosch. Yeah.
we see our homeboy Hieronymus Bosch. Who has?
yeah.
I mean, a lot of people know Bosch. He's awesome, and
He's
his
great.
stuff is fucking brutal
Great
and metal,
show.
and I love it.
It's on Amazon Prime. He's always gonna get his man. You gotta love Bosch.
Different show.
So,
Titus Welliver does it again.
but my point is, in
performance.
art, you're seeing beautiful,
Yeah.
if not brutal, like giant depictions of hell. Like,
Well,
and-
that Bosch painting, I mean, like he's making a very real statement. Like it's whimsical to us, but like he he's making metaphorical like statements, and like hell is very real to him. You know?
Yeah,
what I
and they're
mean?
showing, and all these guys are showing it as these like landscapes of very real places. Tons of people being torn apart by demons and all this shit, that fire and brimstone and these craggly rocks we were talking about. A lot of the imagery that you were talking at the beginning, like you see this in art now, right?
Yeah, I gotta think that like so much of what we think of hell is like now is like defined by
this time period.
people
And
like
actually,
Hieronymus Bosch.
I'm actually going back a little bit here, but like this time period is kind of exactly it. It's the the 14th, 15th century where you really see specific depictions of it, and there's nowhere where it gets more specific than Dante's Inferno. Right?
Yeah.
Dante lived 1265 to 1321, and he wrote I've mentioned this before, but what is called the Divine Comedy, which is a series. It's three main stories, which actually are divided into three parts, and it's a lot of threes divided down.
Yeah.
The first of those main three are the Inferno, which really has the first time we've had such a specific and like geological description of hell, right?
Yeah.
It's very specific, and so much of what we think of now, like the 9 circles of hell, come straight out of this, and he brings a lot of the old
I like how. Like, you know, the Bible never says anything about this, but like it's almost like after Dante writes this book, it's like, oh yeah, that's canon. Put that in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
but the funny thing is, and I'll get to this about how hell is viewed after this, but like, you know, I'm not going to tell you the story of Dante's Inferno. Like,
go read it.
It's fucking rad. It's you know, you can watch YouTube videos that
we'll explain it or whatever.
Explain it. There's a lot of imagery that's really cool, but you see a lot. And one of the things is like these old Greek and Roman stories start becoming really popular again. And he was also a huge fan of Virgil, which you're going to see, who I mentioned earlier, who wrote the Aeneid. But his book has all these characters in it that I mentioned earlier, and all these ideas. But first, I'm just going to say that like you had the way he would describe like hell, where it'd be like you had the very specific circles, and he would, you know, you'd cross into this circle, and then he'd be in, you know, have to cross the river, and like it's a whole story of him going down and very specifically meeting all these people, demons and the Minotaur and all these creatures from like especially like Greek and Roman mythology are in this story, you know.
Creature from the Black Lagoon.
But the thing is, similar to what we were, the Wolfman,
Dracula. He's gonna get your girlfriend.
Dracula's
there.
there.
In love with him.
Yeah. There's like 2 Draculas.
The funny thing is, like, this whole thing is really just a story about him ranting and raving about his political enemies.
Oh yeah,
because
absolutely.
he's from Florence, right? And in the late 13th century, Florence had a lot of like political upheavals, and it became, after a short war, there became 2 kind of main groups: the White Guelphs and the Black Guelphs. And the Black Guelphs wanted to have more connection to the Pope and let the Pope get in the mix, and the White Guelphs wanted more freedom from Rome and have less to see what the popes and the emperor had to say. Rome gets involved, and obviously the Black Guelphs, you know, win out, and the White Guelphs, which Dante was one of, get exiled. So he wrote all this in exile, just mad as hell, you know?
Yeah.
He puts political enemies in hell in his story.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to get into all the specifics of that, but like he's meeting up, running into political enemies. There's a part where he kicks one in the face and doesn't apologize. It's pretty great.
We have no idea who these people are either, but he does. And like, it's so funny because like history doesn't really remember their name, except for we know that Dante hated them, you know, because they're
That's
in
exactly
the
right. I mean, the Pope at the time, he hated a lot, but like there's a point where he meets an old Pope, Pope Nicholas III, who is in the 8th circle of hell for, you know, fraud and misusing the church and stuff. So, I mean, just brief, like, outside of the in the 9 circles, remember how I was saying, like, everything seems to be divided into 3s? Even the 9 circles are sort of separated into 3 different parts.
Yeah.
Like, the first few are sort of like physical sins, your gluttony, your
jaywalking,
you know, whatever. They don't, not specifically 7 deadly sins. What did you say?
Jaywalking.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be in fraud. That'd be in treachery.
Leaving
The
time
middle
on
one
the
is sort of like
microwave.
violence and heresy, and the last one is fraud and treachery, right? Betrayal.
Yeah.
So it's like those three categories, and he kind of got them from the ideas of the main sort of things you don't do by Aristotle. Those kind of ways of thinking. He adds a lot to
That's
it.
the name
like,
of his book. And Aristotle's on the front, like, pointing at it and,
Yeah.
like, laughing.
There's a lot of Aristotle
Things
for
you
this.
don't
I just
do.
know that.
He's pointing towards the lake of fire. Like,
Yeah,
He's like, check it out. I mean, he briefly used the idea of like the categorizing of
Oh my god.
impure behavior. I think they didn't really think
Yeah.
of sin in the same way that these people
No.
do, but like added heresy to violence, and even in violence, like they separate like violence into. In the seventh circle, violence is separated into violence against others, violence against yourself, i.e., suicide, and then violence against God and nature. And in that, they have your sodomites, right? Because that's against nature, as far as they're concerned. Which I think is interesting because actually, in this moment, is the first time he meets a friend who I guess he was like put in hell because he was a sodomite, right?
Oh.
oh, well.
And they
Wait, who
they're
is he
never able to stop.
sodomizing? Let's be real
Yeah,
here.
you're never able to. Yeah, maybe. Probably. I mean, there's always been gay people. That's not.
Yeah.
Maybe he
But
was
they-
just
they-
sodomizing somebody who wanted to be sodomized.
Yeah.
He's gonna go to hell for that? Not on my watch.
Well, Dante's like, he's a friend of mine, but he's here, and we all know why. You know, like
Yeah,
that's
all
basically
the,
what he's saying by doing that. And it's like, that's kind of
They
fucked up.
shouldn't have got that remote stuck in the couch cushions.
A lot of the Greek ideas that I brought up earlier, Cerberus, River Styx, all the rivers I brought up, the Minotaurs down there, giants that fought Zeus are down there. A lot of Greek heroes, Theseus, Jason, Odysseus, Diomedes are all in hell.
Oh, wow.
Though he does kind of view Trojan heroes, they're all in limbo because he loves the Aeneid, and Virgil also lives there. He puts a lot of popes or not popes, sorry, he doesn't. He puts a lot of poets in limbo at the beginning of hell. Which also, even in this, he talks about how, like, all the, your Moses and shit, they're not there because they've been brought to heaven by the harrowing of hell, right? So the ones that are there, like, a lot of the heroes in the Trojan War that were on the side of Troy are there, like Hector and those guys are there.
Yeah.
Because Achilles is in hell. He's down deep. He's a bad guy because he was a Greek. But the Aeneid is essentially, if you remember, I said it was about a Trojan that goes to Italy and kind of his descendants create Rome. So he kind of views the Trojans as proto-Italians, so he kind of views them favorably. Puts them all in limbo.
That's interesting. I guess I just never really thought about it, in that way. Like, yeah, no, but that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, he thought it that way.
If Theseus is in hell, are they, like, pulling him apart and then using different body parts to make him, and they're like, is he still Theseus? And he's like,
I don't remember. There's very specific punishments and where all these people are. Medusa shows up at some point.
I remember that kind of stuff about that book, like, all the crazy shit, like, all the crazy shit they see. And, like,
there's
how
so
people
much I can get into there, but I'm, the city of Dis is like the city of hell, all this shit. And at the ninth circle, where Virgil, did I fucking bring up that he's being guided by Virgil, the poet, this whole time? I may have forgot to mention that.
No, you did. You did.
Okay. Virgil guides him down. At the ninth circle is frozen lake of that has all the true traitors, right? The treacherous. And at the center is Satan himself, and he's this giant beast with wings and 3 heads, and the 3 heads are chewing on like Brutus and Cassius Longinus and Judas Iscariot, and kind of showing them as like, because this dude's Italian, so he's like, well, like the people who betrayed Caesar are bad guys, right? So it's very, very telling about who he thinks are good people and bad people.
It's like the Ready Player One of its time.
Yeah.
Put all the guys, put all the most important guys in here. They're all gonna have cameos. They're gonna show up and wave.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll be in the big fight at the end.
They end up climbing down Satan's legs, and at some point, Virgil has to turn around and start climbing almost upside down. He's like, because it's the center of the earth, right?
Yeah.
So of course they believed it was, and he describes that hell, being on this like crater, is the place. Hell exists from when God threw Lucifer down to earth, and he created this crater where he is to this day at this center of hell, and like they cover it over.
Super Dragon Ball.
Yeah.
You know,
He blasted him
so
with a
Dragon Ball.
Kamehameha.
he like
killed all the
throws him
dinosaurs.
so hard. You know, he goes kablam. You know, like creates this like super crater in the.
Yeah, and Vegeta's there. It's great. So he describes like that's, and when they're flipping around, they call that the center of the universe.
Right.
Because, of course, they viewed Earth as the center of the universe. For the center of the Earth would be the center of the universe, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So then they climb down, or now up, and they as they climb to the other side, which they just now walk through the entire Earth. So and by the way, he describes sizes too. He talks about how deep it is, like very specifically, like measurements, right?
Well,
Yeah.
you know what
I didn't
they
write
say-
any of them down because it's clear he has no fucking idea how big the Earth is.
Well, the devil is in the details.
There you go. Maybe that's
Nice.
where it comes from. It's very detailed.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of the Earth is the mountain of Purgatory, and that's where Purgatorio is about, and where your sort of sinners are getting punished according to the 7 deadly sins.
They have to
go
wait
to
in
heaven,
lines.
right? And I'm not going to get
Yeah.
into that because again, we're not talking about Purgatorio, but the River Lethe that I talked about flows from that river. So there's where you're kind of that sort of ability to forget river.
Just
That sounds so
comes
much
into play.
easier than any of it.
you're like, yeah, I was just in purgatory, but I'm just gonna drink out of this river and just forget about my
Chillax.
sorrows.
Yeah.
Just
Well, I think Dante's Inferno was
how'd I get so cut up? I don't know.
I can't
enormously
remember.
popular.
Honestly,
right.
couldn't tell you.
And again, this was before. I wanted to go into great detail, but like this is before Hieronymus Bosch and stuff. So
yeah.
you really saw it in art a lot after this, like
Yeah, once
making
you
it a
kinda give words
physical,
to it.
like very strongly described place. Not only, but in a weird way, but also made it seem more fictional in a weird way. Of course, they believed in hell, and of
But, like,
course, they considered a lot of
otherworldly.
this canon. But it really like people were became perfectly comfortable having hell in their art and stories and things like that. Like it became almost fashionable to do so in a way.
One thing that I noticed like pretty early on when you were kind of talking about these first depictions, somebody like without a point of reference, with zero outside of the real world, things that they saw with their own eyes or things that were described to them, had to come up with all of this shit.
Well, it's like similar to, I mean, there's so many elements there that he didn't come up with, but many he did. And he kind of just put a lot of these ideas into one spot and kind of, like I said, just created this sort of physical blueprint of hell.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I mean, that's kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, you know. He took all these little pieces, but like each piece, somebody like without any point of reference, even like like even in like the reference to Tundale, where maybe he had a stroke, maybe he had a vision of hell, he was able to essentially visualize something that like nobody had ever seen before, didn't really have a point of reference for, and put it into like really, really concrete terms. And to me, like, even if we do our spin on hell,
Right.
we're either rejecting all previously conceived like kind of like artistic flourishes, or we're doing our own riff on it, and there's no in
Exactly.
between because it all exists.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
no, I think that's. I mean, and I don't even think that story of Tundale, like I think the ideas of the jaws of the underworld, a lot of the things he described, kind of were just ideas floating around at the time. That story is supposed to be like the dude Tundale told the Irish monk himself, and the Irish monk wrote it down.
If that's true, then like it's almost like confirmation bias.
Yeah. All right. So, after the Reformation had fractured Christianity in the 16th century, obviously starting with like Martin Luther and all that, the beginning of Protestantism, ideas started to be able to kind of appear outside of the church's canon, right?
Right.
So you had, like we were talking about, like people liked Dante's Inferno, so they're like, okay, that's canon, right? Because
Right.
it either
Right.
is canon or it's fucking heretical is pretty much how people viewed anything. But
Basically,
now
yeah.
with people being like, hey, yeah, you have your own interpretation now, a lot more than having sort of an empire-based fucking religion. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right.
There's things about the Bible I like and things I don't.
Yeah, and I have to believe like
I could read it myself
I mean, at this
now.
time, certain people like there were people even like after the Inquisition who looked at that and they were like, maybe this is fucked up. Maybe we need some change. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, it's like times of suffering. Not a lot changes, but a lot changes during the Reformation. And
Right.
this isn't the story about the Reformation. This isn't a story about Protestantism. This is a story about hell. So now I'm going to tell you about a guy who was born in 1608 named John Milton.
Yes.
Now, an interesting thing about John Milton is he was actually a supporter of freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and he was against the monarchy. And what you kind of see in his story, which I'm going to get into, Paradise Lost, is you can kind of see that, like the fact that he actually takes Lucifer / Satan in a kind of sympathetic way.
Yeah.
That's something you'd never see before. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's beautifully written. I've read most of it. It's recent enough that they don't generally need to translate it, but also very difficult to read.
Right.
Kind of like Shakespeare in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of written in that way. Yeah.
It very much is, and not too dissimilar a time. Though I do think like it's interesting, like the ideas of freedom of speech, freedom of press, rejection of the monarchy are very Enlightenment ideas, and this is kind of like he's kind of a little bit before that, but these ideas you can see are bouncing around, right?
Yeah.
So in Paradise Lost is kind of the story of Adam and Eve as told, or by Satan, sort of. It follows him and follows his journey.
He's the main character, yeah.
He is the main character. Absolutely
Yeah.
he is. Satan, or Lucifer, in the story, as he's basically... He's thrown out of heaven for rejecting God, and there's a giant battle, and they lose. And they say that 1/3 of the angels all rejected, and they followed Satan, who thought he was greater and better than all of them. And at the time, Lucifer, he was like the most beautiful of all of.
I was gonna say,
God's angels?
Yeah, wasn't Lucifer the morning star just like fucking hot? Like,
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And a lot of these ideas, modern ideas of Lucifer, specifically the fallen angel, the beautiful fallen angel who rejected Satan. Though those ideas have always been
Rejected
there.
God. Yeah.
Oh yeah, rejected God. Sorry.
And
I'm a
specifically,
Gnostic, as you know.
it's because like he's like, no, we need to give them
Well, it's like-
knowledge. Like you
like-
want them
Yeah.
to remain ignorant. You know.
in like Sandman, for example, like Neil Gaiman directly references Milton many times, right? Like the better to reign in heaven than to serve in hell. He's mentioned.
Yeah.
It's kind of a famous quote.
Also, Nick Cave.
Yeah,
Constant.
yeah. Nick Cave is way into this kind of shit.
Oh yeah.
I'm a big Nick Cave fan. So he gets thrown into hell, and it describes hell too. Like, and I even think they use the word Tartarus again. All the demons awake and they look. They're like, oh, we've turned into horrible monsters rather than our beautiful angelic forms, right? So they're demonic now, right? And this feels so much more like, almost like cinematic than we've heard previous things. Where it's like you could make this into a movie. It wouldn't be like, oh no, look at us, we're monstrous
they
creatures
tried,
now.
and it didn't happen.
It's too problematic, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't think so. Who gives a shit? But
Yeah.
so
People
they
would protest
go to
it or
hell
something.
and they build their fortress in hell, and that's called Pandemonium, which means all demons, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? So they have this
Pandemonium.
fortress in hell. That's where the word pandemonium comes from. It's
awesome.
John Milton.
Yeah.
And they have a council, and they all talk, and it describes specific demons. A lot of these were, people believed in these demons as at one point as gods, and they're still using them by name at this point. Like, and there's this discussion where you have Moloch, who wants open warfare, Belial, who thinks things would be worse if they attacked heaven again, and he wants to wait and see. Mammon calls for building hell up into a kingdom as great as heaven. This is all what I wrote here. Oh, sorry. Beelzebub tells them that he's heard God's secret little plan of building earth and creating new beings that he'll love even more than angels. And if we were to go to earth and corrupt these fucking dickheads, that would be a great way of getting revenge on God. And everyone's like, yes, that's a fucking great idea. They also like the idea of building up hell, too.
Yeah.
So they're like, let's do that. We'll make hell into a kingdom
we're
of
doing
our own.
both planes. Thanks, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we really like this fucking
Yeah, it's a corporate office.
Imagine it like that. But remember that they're in demonic form. So
Yeah.
picture Satan as a demonic being, and there's
I
great
guess
images of
that's-
like Beelzebub is this like the Lord of Flies, and
I guess that's
Moloch.
what your pretty face is going to hell is.
Yeah, that's true.
Is
Yeah.
that.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. But they're all in on a conference.
Yeah.
You got
Conference room.
Asmodeus or whatever. He's on a conference call with Moloch and the rest of them,
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
corporate strategy.
Yeah. So Satan's like,
party
you know
whole
what?
thing.
I'm gonna find this Earth place. I'm gonna find it. They don't know where it is because the
It's in a different
cosmos
realm.
is mostly chaos, and chaos in the sort of ancient Greek terms, where it's like nothingness and also everything. Like there's nothing has been made out there. It's just chaos and nothing and everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it sounds like
that's
somebody
kinda-
who doesn't know what they're talking about trying to describe everything.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't know how to describe it if that didn't make sense to you, because it doesn't make any fucking
Oh,
sense. to begin with.
totally. Yeah.
It's
Imagine
like,
the inside of the Big Bang before the Big Bang.
the opposite of order.
Well, I would be one of those people that didn't know anything about it, trying to describe everything about it. You
There's
know?
nothing to know. It doesn't make any fucking sense. That's why it's called chaos, Jerry.
There's
There's no
children wearing
reason or
top
order.
hats.
Yeah.
So he passes. He finds his way out of hell, and he finds these gates, and there's like fucking I don't know, like 9 gates or something. I don't really. Who cares? It describes parts
There's
of
a few
hell,
of
and
them.
then he meets these two people, these two beings, and their names are Sin and Death.
Cool.
And they're like, "You don't remember us? We're your children." And in the act of
And he's like,
rebel-
oh shit.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because he's like in the act of rebelling against God. He gave birth to Sin, and he impregnated Sin, and she gave birth to Death, or he I don't fucking. So now you got Sin and Death, two personifications of these ideas. Satan's children, created by his actions. They have a key, and they're like, all right, we'll let you out. We'll let you out of hell. Right? And that's they let him out. So he travels further, and he meets the personification of chaos in the chaos, and night, the personification of night. And he's like, hey guys, I'm gonna fuck up shit. I'm gonna go to Earth, and I'm gonna corrupt these people. Chaos is like, I love chaos. That's like my main thing.
Sign me up.
Hell yeah,
wild
it's over
card,
there.
baby.
He guides them this way. Meanwhile, what'd you say?
I said
A
wild card, baby.
Wild card, bitches!
Yeah.
He's played by Charlie Day in the movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that'd be hilarious.
Yeah.
Satan obviously played by Glenn Howerton.
Yeah, there you go.
This is the most beautiful.
I am
Yeah.
a golden god. Yeah.
Look at the light he gives off. So while he's going to Earth, Sin and Death build a bridge between Hell and Earth so you can travel it easily and corrupt everybody, right?
Yeah.
So here's where, like, Genesis comes in. Satan travels to Earth, finds the Garden of Eden, he tricks Eve into eating the forbidden fruit. Adam eats the fruit as well, so they can be cast out together. They get cast out of paradise, and then Christ is like, I know how to fix this. I'll get crucified one day. And that makes a lot of sense to me, but I don't know about you guys.
Well, sacrificing. Like,
Well, he's-
like the point was like he's
What I don't
sacrificing
get
himself
if
for like
he
all of
is
humanity's
sacrificing
sake or
himself
something.
for original sin, why does we have to worry about original sin anymore?
Exactly. Why is it still around then?
If
So,
Christians are listening to
why
this,
is it-
having
why is it
100
such a problem?
ranting and raving, being like,
Yeah,
"What? No,
like,
you don't get it.
if
Reddit don't
Christ
get
did it, if Christ did it, then it won't matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then it's fine. Then,
It's like, are
then
we- what did he
his
do?
sacrifice means nothing if
He
I don't sin, right?
sacrificed so I could eat a foot-long meatball sub and masturbate in a mirrorless room. So no one will judge me. He died for that. That's what
No.
he...
'Cause he
so
used
we
you
can
when you're
sin
sleeping.
all we want.
Yeah.
If you read Dante's
That's
Inferno,
what
you
I'm
will be
saying.
judged for that by Minos. Not the Minotaur, but they are technically related.
Not King Minos, right?
No, it is. Yeah,
It is
Yeah,
King
yeah.
Minos.
yeah. He's the.
Wow.
And actually,
It's
in
his-
Greek mythology, he is one of the. Once he dies, I think in
I
a
didn't know that.
bathtub.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't
no.
know what happened to
Jim
there's
him
three.
after
Morrison.
that.
There's three judges in the underworld. One of them is Minos, and he brings Minos into the. Yeah, and I think he's like a twisted creature of like he, probably
Yeah.
created by
Punished his ass.
the guy who made Spawn.
Oh, no.
yeah, Todd McFarlane.
Daedalus.
Todd McFarlane.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. I thought
Daedalus.
Daedalus made Spawn.
Daedalus is probably in it in the Limbo, actually.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember. You can find. You can read the fucking book yourself. How about that?
Yeah.
He's like, I'm making all these cool new inventions to torture people. They shoot you right next to the sun, and then your wings melt and you fall back down to the ground.
Yes.
I do it on purpose now.
I mean, that is another story of like, it falling. Like actually, the idea of like falling in flames. It's a similar Icarus, Satan. It happens again and again. You see these ideas over and over, and I think it's kind of like I don't really believe in the. I don't believe in the Jungian, collective subconscious or any of that.
No.
I just think that people hear the same stories and they just do the same things.
Well, I think people when they're always
Zeus
looking,
turn
when they're always,
himself into a bull and fuck Minos's wife, and then she gave birth to the Minotaur, and he was
very
like,
close.
"Oh no!" And
Very
then so he
close
got
to that.
Daedalus to build the maze to put him in.
All of that's correct, except this is one time where he was like spurned by Minos' wife, Zeus, so he made her fall in love. I think it was Zeus. Fall in love with his prized bull. That's what it was. So it was a real
That's
bull.
what it was. Okay.
Though he turned himself into shit and raped women all the time. He's
but the real story,
he's a bad dude.
But the real story is that they had tragically a deformed child, and Minos
That might
couldn't
be
love.
true.
Minos couldn't love his own son, and that's why the Minotaur is one of the few Greek creatures that has a animal head and a human body. Most of them have a human head or human features and an animal body of some kind.
Oh yeah.
So
That's
what
really
he
interesting.
did, what he did is he told everyone that to save his own reputation, he told everyone that his wife fucked a bull, and that it's her fault that his son came out all deformed like this. But he couldn't kill his own son, so he hid him in a maze where he could go in there and feed his son and sort of love his son because he couldn't kill him. But
This is very interesting. But this is
everyone
also
was
speculation,
like, but
right?
everyone, total speculation.
Yeah.
But everyone was like, there's a monster in there, and like the fucking bro of the day, like frat boy, Theseus?
Perseus.
Yeah. No,
Theseus.
Theseus.
Was it
Theseus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Theseus is like, oh, I'm gonna fucking do it, bro. And he goes in there and he cuts his head off and he brings it out and everyone fucking claps.
Do you remember-
And through tears, King Minos applauds Theseus.
Yes. Yeah, that's what happened.
That's my version of that story.
I actually don't even think that even close to the story actually happened.
No.
So maybe the king had a deformed son, and it kind of went
Just
from
to
there.
add to the tragic mythology before we get back on topic,
The Minotaur is a really sad story.
Can the maze that he built be based off the activity placemat that him and the Minotaur would share when they went to Denny's?
In the modern retelling, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And only the two of them understand the dark irony of the fact that he's at the center of the maze.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
And
like,
Batman.
I can't remember why. I know that he ended up trapping Daedalus and his son Icarus in the maze, and they created the things to fly out. He's like, don't fly too close to the sun. I mean, wasn't it under... Was there a window they fucking flew out of? I don't fucking know.
I don't know. And his son was like, fuck you, Dad. And then he's like,
Fuck you, Dad, I'm gonna fly as close... And that's a story about pride.
Yeah.
Which so is this Lucifer story.
Yeah. And that's why every year during Pride, we have to, all of our LGBTQ plus friends, we have to say, hey, don't fly too close to the sun. That's what this month is really about.
I don't think that's the meaning.
It's exact opposite.
I feel like anybody with a sense of humor would be able to see the comic timing of that.
think
I
anybody-
It is
understand.
clearly not true.
You're
I
giving
think anybody,
yourself
unless this
a lot
is the
of credit,
first
but yeah.
episode they've ever listened to, and they made it this far into this episode,
Like, I don't know about
unoffended.
these guys. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I don't even have Twitter, so take your best shot.
Yeah. You're gonna get doxxed.
The next day, like fired.
You're just totally gone. Yeah.
It was a joke, guys. It was a fucking
got
joke.
canceled.
Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
Turns out I got canceled. I'm a
So
regular
at
Harvey
the end,
Weinstein.
gang, yeah, the end of Paradise Lost, which yes, I'm still talking about. Essentially, the idea is, with the bridge, sin and death now are able to live on Earth until Judgment Day, and they, that's where sin and death, us dying and shit, comes from. But returning to Pandemonium, Satan finds that all his fellow fallen angels have been turned into snakes, and hell is filled with trees that have fruit that turn to ash when you eat it, and that's the end of the story.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's a pretty gnarly book. If you've never read it,
There's a lot in the middle there that I
Yeah.
brought. Like, the
prepare
point
yourself.
where he gets
like,
to
it's pretty cool.
Earth and the point where he goes back is actually most of the book. I really gloss over that because, again, this isn't a story about the Garden of Eden episode.
Yeah.
In the 18th century, you had people started to think about reason over religion in a lot of ways. Your thinkers, this is called the Enlightenment, right?
Yeah.
We're familiar with this because
You're Aufklärung.
a lot of our people who created our country were this kind of thinkers, you know?
Yeah.
And one of the biggest differences between thinkers of this time is almost everyone up until this point in history tried to use scripture to basically like align that with their beliefs, right? So I think people would be like, well, I believe this, and I'm going to interpret these parts of the Bible or whatever.
And bing, bing,
To
boom,
justify
I'm
that.
justified. Yeah.
In the Enlightenment, you didn't see that anymore. What you were seeing was just outright decrying it, being like, this is superstition. And you having that be kind of like forefront was very new.
Yeah,
right?
this idea of like having things like constitutions, this
Mm-hmm.
idea of a man's law governing other man rather than God's law governing man.
Well, it was saying,
that
like-
was a new thing. You know what I mean?
Freedom of speech, freedom of press, rejection of the monarchy are very enlightened ideas. And I said, John Milton subscribed to those ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, he was alive at the beginning of kind of where the Enlightenment started. So you can see how people started thinking that way. And I actually think it's interesting because this follows like this, couple 100-year time period after the Reformation where I think people were just fucking tired of religion,
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Like, I have to think that...
because I think they kept, for a long time, they kept, like, looking up at these, like, aristocratic people, and more often than not, there was also the clergy. Where,
Right.
like, you guys aren't doing anything either, and you're getting most of the land, and most of, like, the money and shit. Like, how come life is miserable for me, but it's not you? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
They're like, guys.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
God,
It was a real
Jesus.
try to look towards reason over like tradition, religion, and try to understand how
earthly reason. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I kind of guess it's my own bias to call reason earthly reason to begin with.
But that's kind of what it was. Like when they talked about reason, they were talking about earthly things. They were talking
it's like-
about like things you could see. Your Immanuel Kant's of the world.
Oh, exactly.
They were talking about that.
Voltaire, for example, like
Voltaire.
he talked about the idea of hell as being almost absurd, and he's talking about he's like, dude, he straight up says he's like that idea came from the Egyptians and the Greeks and shit, and he's like, I don't even think your early Jewish people believed in that, right? He's straight up saying what I'm saying this whole time. You know, he's like, they were like, so what? You steal one fucking lamb and you go to hell? That's ridiculous.
Right.
And that, I mean, Voltaire talks about that. You know, I thought this was really. I'm going to read in the Dictionary of Samuel Johnson. Can I read to you the definition of hell?
Yes.
Go
I'm going to
for
read
it.
this to you.
Yes.
Hell, pronounced hell, obviously. Saxon. 1. A place of the devil and wicked souls. 2. A place of separate souls, whether good or bad. 3. Temporal death. 4. A place at a running play to which those are caught and carried. I don't understand what that means. 5. The
those
place
are
in which a
caught-
tailor throws his threads.
A place where Taylor throws.
I'm just telling you what it says.
That's
6.
oddly.
Maybe they
like,
used it in that time period, right?
Well,
like
that's
maybe it was
odd,
kind of like a,
this idea of like the fates cutting the string on like the spinning wheel
maybe.
and like
Yeah.
that thing.
I thought it was more like at work when I would
Taylor throws
joke.
the string.
Like I would
don't
talk to
know,
my
like it's a
friend,
life. I don't know.
and we'd be like, "Oh, throw that in the trash from whence it came." Like you're just joking around, but like throw that into
Right.
hell. You know,
Right.
maybe
Right.
that's what. 6, the infernal powers, and 7, and this is the most telling. It is used in composition by old writers more than the modern.
That's
It is-
pretty good.
It is used. Say that again.
It is used in composition by old writers more than the modern.
Huh.
Like he's straight up being like, "This is archaic."
He's
Right.
like,
Yeah,
it's
it's
boomer
archaic
memes.
shit. Yeah, it's
Yeah, exactly. They're like weird. Well, and I think that, as I was saying earlier, is like the generation, like multiple
talk about
generations
this
before
anymore.
this, were dealing with so much fighting over religion because of the Reformation. That
Yeah.
I just think after generations, and you started seeing a little more progress and like comfort, as I was saying, like progress comes with comfort. You had people rethinking these ideas, and you had a generation of people who were like, "What the fuck are we fighting about that for? We're fighting over superstition. This is stupid, right?"
Yeah.
That being said, during this time period, there, outside of Enlightenment writers and philosophers in the 18th century, most people who weren't engaging in this kind of thought, right? These
Right.
weren't your writers and stuff. These guys don't have books, but they still believed in hell
as
as a very real place, right?
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, Catholicism still
remember,
enforced hell.
Remember that, like, not all of Europe was totally touched in an indelible way by the Enlightenment. You know
Well,
what
I think
mean?
a lot of these people were
Germany had this-
London
well, Germany
and
had
Paris.
this. Yeah, Germany had this push and pull.
Yeah.
Russia never really saw it ever. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Well,
it's
I
a
think
very
one of the
specific
biggest
group
reasons.
of educated people at that
Yeah.
specific point in time.
The
I think-
Ottomans never saw it, but
I think
it
that,
spread through Europe. You know, like with Napoleon, right? But it goes to show, like, you know, who was fighting religious wars and who wasn't fighting religious wars, sort of pre and post the Enlightenment. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. So what I'm saying is, like, Catholicism still actually they're very much believed in as hell as a real place. Puritans and Quakers as well, who brought this idea to the United States, and during this period of time, you saw this sort of like evangelical, which is a very specifically American idea, revivalism spreading across the colonies. At this exact time, and I think part of the reason certain elements of Enlightenment thinking exist so much in the United States is that the people who running shit, you know, I mean, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson hung out in Paris all the time. They were big time Enlightenment thinkers, right?
Totally.
And you don't
Yeah.
really, I mean, they were sort of the original, like, church versus state kind of guys. Like,
well, and
Chur-
they were Protestant too.
Yeah.
And which is
Yeah.
a big thing, you know what I mean? In the way that they were Enlightenment thinkers, because I mean, what does Protestant lend itself to? You know, basically, I can interpret things. I'm my own person. I can read
would
the
you
Bible
almost
myself.
call these guys, and I think it can in many ways can fit under the realm of Protestantism, because you don't have to have a church telling you what to do.
Right? There's an
You can
individualistic
have
quality
almost like
to
a
that.
deist way of thinking, right?
Yeah, totally.
Where it's almost like, I
And some
believe
of
God
these-
exists.
And some of these founding fathers of our country were a lot like that. Like
Oh, I think
Thomas
they were,
Jefferson was
and-
one of the least religious people out of any of our founding fathers, and Ben Franklin as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Ben Franklin, he got a lot of Enlightenment ideas from Paris, and he was kind of there for the whores. The Enlightenment
he's one of the
ideas
like
kind of came
Frank-
second.
Frank Reynolds.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's him.
I've heard people compare those
sorry.
two. It's really
Sex
funny.
workers. He was
Yeah.
there for the sex workers.
Yeah, you're right. The sex
but-
worker of Babylon.
Frank
in the
Reynolds and
Revolutions.
Ben Franklin. That's fantastic. I was out banging whores. Yeah, the way he says it.
In the 19th century, you start seeing a lot of macabre literature outside the realm of religion. So, like, these ideas that we were talking about, like going in hell, and like people, they've been talking about, like, you know, cutting people up. Like Dante has things where people were ripped apart and all this
Yeah.
crazy fucking imagery, and I mean, the Middle Ages had that brutal fucking artwork and imagery and literature. But now you're starting to see that outside of religion, like not just secular, but like outside of hell, and just like the Marquis de Sade appears in this period of time,
the Marquis
right?
de Sade.
And he, you know, his shit is fucking
Even-
brutal, and you have
Even Edgar
Sorry.
Allan Poe, I would say.
exactly, yes,
You know what I
exactly.
mean?
Edgar Allan Poe. You have
Like hell is a place on earth, and kind of a thing.
yeah,
you know?
you have a lot of Gothic novels being written during this
Yeah.
time, and then that kind of
punk-
like Mary
it's-
Shelley, and
It's kind of punk
know.
rock hell. You know what I mean?
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that these ideas, these brutal imaginings that have kind of been within like Christian thought, kind of confined to the idea of hell, are now starting to just be works of fiction. You just kind of, it doesn't have anything to do with that anymore, right?
Yeah.
And we're seeing that to this day. I mean, you see depictions, like I would call secular depictions of hell, like I said in Sandman. And there's a show called Lucifer. Now,
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Right.
Where he's just a fucking hot dude living in LA or whatever.
He's actually based off of the Neil Gaiman version. I've never seen that show, but I don't know.
No,
If
I
it's for me.
looks
my
like to me.
stepdad really likes it, and it's probably because there's a really hot dude at the lead.
Yeah.
But he was like,
Yeah.
I love it. It's so good. And also there is some ruminating on life and death and what have you. So that's pretty topical for him. And but I think. And I tried to get him to watch Sandman by being like, "Hey,
would hate
it's
Sandman.
it's the same. It's kind of all in the same cinematic
It's another
universe
hunk.
in a way."
Yeah.
It's technically based.
another hunk.
What's her name that who plays Lucifer in the Sandman show is technically based off the exact same Lucifer from that show, Lucifer.
Huh.
Yeah, it's the DC Lucifer.
I'd rather
really, but
see fucking Gwendolyn Christie living in LA, fucking like driving like a red Ferrari that has like a license plate that says like
Fuck yeah.
too hot to die or something. I don't know.
Let me ask you guys.
That's
pretty
enough.
good.
That's enough letters, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you guys real quick, like
Two.
the modern
I
interpretation
think
of
it's
hell.
one too
Like,
many.
That would I think that would work.
like
Is it 7 or 8
I
on
don't
a
know what you're
license
talking
plate? Characters on a license plate.
You
7.
can always put HT.
Oh yeah, okay. Too hot to die, and yeah.
Anyway,
go-
sorry.
Yeah. So let me ask you guys, like, how would you view these ideas that I've been bringing up to you that represent in sort of modern culture or like particularly fiction or interpretations of hell or hell-like ideas? Can you guys think of anything that you've seen these kind of ideas in?
Well,
I mean,
your pretty face is going to hell is probably the
and
most
that's-
recent.
That's a line drive,
Well, I know I brought up
Well,
I mean, briefly the Grim Reaper, because it's kind of tangentially referenced to this, but like you see that in
I do
Seventh
feel-
Seal and
I do
and then,
feel that your pretty face is going to hell is a sort of an important step in like
Yeah,
this process
I love that show.
you've been describing, and I think because like this important step is like that hell is funny and it's absurd and it's stupid and it's lame and it's funny and it sucks, like all of those things, It's basically, just another natural progression.
Well, kind of like
because it wasn't until like the 19th century that we could even start talking about horrific things outside of hell. You know what I mean?
yeah. Like I was
So
saying, I mean,
like that comes way late.
And well, even like the Enlightenment, like I said, like it, like Voltaire talking about it, or later like Mark Twain makes fun of Satan and God and shit, and kind of dissects that shit.
And I think a lot of it is it depends on when it's being depicted in history, where it's being depicted in history, and like you mentioned, that like kind of similar to the early 19th century, a lot more of the horror stories that are popular in our culture now mostly deal with real people, the real world. They're not going into hell and being torn apart by demons, because although most horrible demons are already here. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
The worst
And
demons are already
that's sort
on
of
Earth.
a cynical rejection that like no, it's everything is going to be okay. The world is a bright place. We're moving forward. This is the Enlightenment, for God's sake. And it's like, no.
Well,
Life is miserable, and it sucks
there were
here.
ideas
There
from
are
the
horrible things that
Enlightenment
happen here.
that really continued going, but there was a rejection of that where it was like, yeah, but things still suck. And I think that like if you even go back to like Augustine talking about how like he's people listen to him because they're like, I'm not finding fulfillment. Like the Roman idea of like finding fulfillment in life, which is a very like Plato talks about that.
Well, and Stoicism, really, like this idea that like expect the worst, so when the worst doesn't happen, it's good.
Yeah, exactly. I think when you're suffering,
that's a vast oversimplification, but yeah.
Well, it's like I was saying, it's like when you were suffering, like in the Dark Ages, like it's hard to be told that you need to find fulfillment. The same thing is happening post-enlightenment, where people feel the same way, where they're like, this shit's not helping me.
Yeah,
you know?
I don't feel so enlightened. Yeah. Like, there's always that. Like,
I'm sure if you can spend, a few years in Paris just for fun, I'm sure that life is great for you.
Yeah,
you know?
I always do feel that there are like these big waves, of like preeminent thought or predominant thought, right? And then there's like these smaller waves of smaller rejection, like the Beats like rejecting sort of like the chest thumping nationalism at the end of the war, you know what I mean? The Beat generation sort of being like, no, America's different than that, like, you know what I mean? It's something else. Or like, the punk rock era of the 70s, and like maybe even the grunge era as well for like Gen X, like these smaller waves that are sort of like ahead of their time, but also misunderstood in their own time.
I do think that's true, and I think that like a lot of these
of
ideas resonate later. I mean, Plato's still somewhat relevant today.
Yeah. I think like the idea of hell, it's a lot like art. It's a lot like just how we're feeling, not collectively. I feel like that's a wrong term, but like how everything's going. Are we being romantic, or are we being realistic here?
I hate to keep talking about Plato, but wasn't he the kind of like, he talked about art as the reason you look at art and enjoy it is because it's speaking some unconscious truth to you,
right?
That you might feel like some part of you is missing, or part of you that needs to hear, and even like paintings and all this stuff, like they mean something to you in a way that resonates with a truth that you want to hear or need to hear.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, absolutely. And what it really comes down to is this idea of, romanticizing things or accepting the reality of things. And like you were saying earlier, like when things change and you almost get like more like depictions of hell in art, like real depictions of hellfire, there are times of they're more, they're better, right? And then in these worst times, like little changes, and there's almost like this grim reality where like, the paintings become more accurate, like the realism is better, you know what I mean, in a lot of ways, because so there's this pendulum swing, right? And even the way you understand or even look at hell, even the ultimate worst place you can go now, right? Has sort of changed with those ebbs and flows and sort of human thought. I am Jerry Nash, your humble history boy, as always, and I've done zero work for this episode, and I feel
this was
great.
my wedding present to you.
Yes,
was
my
to
goodness.
write an episode.
Yeah.
It's kind of true.
It pretty much is, because we went on our honeymoon. That's basically why I didn't do anything for this one. But thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah. It was a lot of work, to be honest. I enjoyed every second of it. It was a lot of fun.
And I'm Tyler Armentrout. Like I said, first time, long time. I so enjoyed this episode. I learned so much. If you feel the same way, there's a lot of ways you can show us that you feel that way. 5-star review, Apple Podcasts.
Yes.
You can also give us a positive review on Spotify. Thumbs up on the old YouTube. Shoot us a comment. What? Yeah, thank you to everyone who's done that. You can also shoot us a comment, question, concern, and everything else under the sun at historyboyspodcast@gmail.com. Okay, if you really, really, really want to show your support, you can hop on to our Patreon, and for as little as $1 a month, get access to our Discord, just like our new Patreon pal, Mitchell.
Mitchell!
Ding, 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 ding. Thank you,
Mitch. Mitchell!
And you get to be the first Patreon pal to get a shout out at the $1 level, because we're shifting things ever so slightly. With the way that the Discord has grown, we want to make it as easy as possible to get on there. And so, a couple of things. we shifted things so it's $1 to get on, like it always has been. You get the shout out just for signing up, so we can get more people on the Discord joining the conversation. And kind of to that end, the $5 tier is really for the Patreon show. The $10 tier is really for the vault of all of the content.
For getting everything. Yeah, and honestly, there is going to be more in that vault as we continue. Basically, anything special or anything will be towards that vault, right?
Yeah. And we want to give you access so you can swim through like a Scrooge McDuck style character.
Yeah. Embarrassment of riches.
Yes. You know what, gang? I am Christopher Whedon. I am a history boy, and I really anybody who stuck with me through this episode where I actually got to make my own. It was a lot of fun. I was actually able to talk about some level of mythology, because we're not really a mythology podcast, though it is tangential to history.
It's in there.
Yeah, I was, and I like hella brutal shit, so it was a lot of fun. Pun intended, hella, hell of a, Anyway, thank you for listening. We are History Boys, and I love you, bye. I just know.